Hey, Mr. Napper, your mic is open. Jesse, I think we're ready to go.
I think we're live now, yeah. All right, thank you everybody for coming. Welcome. This is an emergency special meeting of the Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections and Voter Registration. Our agenda, the first item on our agenda is to read the board member oath of office, and I'll go ahead and just do that quickly. It says, I do swear or affirm that I will, as a member of the Board of Elections, duly attend all ensuing primaries and elections during the continuance thereof, that I will, to the best of my ability, prevent any fraud, deceit, or abuse in carrying on the same, that I will make a true return of such primaries and elections, and that I will at all times truly, impartially, and faithfully perform my duties in accordance with Georgia laws to the best of my judgment and ability. So that's just sort of a refresher of what we're doing here. We've all sworn that oath. The next item is to adopt the agenda. We have a motion to adopt the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Motion's made by Ms. Fambro. Do we have a second?
Second, Mr. Raffle.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go down the line here. Mr. Napper, your vote.
Aye.
Fambro.
Aye.
Ms. Till.
Aye.
And Mr. Raffle.
Yes.
All right, I vote aye as well. Agenda is adopted unanimously. So the next thing we go to is the director's update. Director Sosby, would you like to share with us any update?
Hi there. Yes. Good afternoon. Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections. I don't really have an update, but I would like to update you on the election, that there was a total of 26,015 ballots cast in the combined May 19th election. On election day, we had 8,441 ballots that were cast at our precincts. And then for advanced voting, we had 2,603 ballots cast. Absentee, 14,971. That gives us a total of 26,015 ballots cast in the combined election. And I wanted you to have those numbers so that.
Take care. Yep. Hello, everyone.
There.
Mr. Drake. Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Sosby.
But yes, that's what I wanted to make sure you had that information. And that is the unofficial results until the election is declared official through your vote.
Thank you. I heard 2015 total, 14,971 absentees, right?
14,971.
All right. Do any members have questions for our director and her update? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to public comment. We've had a number of emails sent that were not public comment per se for this meeting, but that are related to the topic of this meeting. We've had several emails sent prior to the announcement of this meeting, and even though they're not public comment, I think it might be good to include those meetings in our minutes, or excuse me, those emails in our minutes. Comment that goes specifically things that were like mentioned for public comment. We only have, there's like 4 or 5 right here is what I saw. So I'll go through this quickly. These are emails sent to us and for public comment, specifically for public comment. It says, to the Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections and Voter Registration, in response to today's specially called meeting of your body, I'm writing to share my experience trying to vote by mail in the June 9, 2020 Georgia primary here in Athens-Clarke County. I've been a type 1 diabetic since I was 15 months old and just celebrated my 39th birthday this past weekend. I also work in healthcare. For these reasons, my family and I are very careful and try to practice physical distancing as much as possible in order to protect ourselves and those with whom we interact during this time of pandemic. As part of that effort, my spouse and I sought to vote by mail for the June 9 primary. As of this morning, it appears that our votes still have not been counted. Our initial absentee ballot requests were received by the Board of Elections on May 6th. On May 18th, I contacted the Board of Election absentee ballots clerk to inquire about the status of our applications because we'd not yet received our mail ballots. I was told that our applications were not processed due to a clerical error and that the office would resubmit our request. Eventually, we received our ballots. I'm not the world's smartest man, but I'm not a moron. I know how to follow directions on the ballot. My wife is pretty smart too. I dropped off our sealed ballots between 5 and 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, June 4th at the dedicated drop-off site at the Athens-Clarke County Library. As of the writing of this email, our respective My Voter page status updates show that our ballots were not received by the BOE. To say we are livid is an understatement. A June 13 Associated Press article quotes top Georgia voting official, voting implementation manager Gabriel Sterling, saying that individuals complaining of such errors are, quote, activists who have an axe to grind, end quote. Ensuring that our fundamental right to vote is protected is not an axe to grind in the least. We're very disappointed in this process and the seeming lack of concern on the part of officials. Our votes must be counted. We have documentation to support these claims, and I'm happy to discuss this matter with anyone willing to assist. I can be reached at this email address or at Alyssa's email, or excuse me, his phone number. Thank you for taking the time to read this note and rectify this issue, not only for me and my wife, but for the many other Georgians who may have had a similar experience. Respectfully, Kyle Galbraith. And then the next email is from Rachel Roberts Galbraith, Kyle's wife. It's to the BOE and voter registration folks. My husband, Kyle Galbraith, emailed about our problems in receiving absentee ballots and having them counted. I wanted to add my husband's email that I also called the office of the Board of Elections on election day and daily last week to check on my ballot. At first, I was assured that absentee ballots were still being scanned in. Then I was told that it could be due to a problem with my ballot. I never received a call back to notify me if this was the case. By Friday, I was told that it was unclear what happened to my ballot, only that it could not be found. I was told that my call would be returned when there was more information. As of late Monday morning, I still do not know what has happened. We are concerned about our votes, but also about the votes of other people who also may have encountered clerical errors and who likely never received an absentee ballot, as would have been the case for us if we had not checked and called about the problem. We're also concerned about there could be other people who submitted absentee ballots, but who didn't know to check the My Voter page and who might mistakenly believe that their votes were counted and they were not. I never could have imagined having to work this hard or having to be this persistent to have my vote counted. And as of this email, I am not at all confident that it will be counted. This experience has undermined my deep faith in the electoral process. I have been left feeling very worried about the votes of my fellow Athenians and deeply uneasy about future voting during a pandemic, specifically targets vulnerable citizens who deserve to hear their voices heard. We appreciate the amount of time and effort that goes into every election, and we deeply hope that changes will be made to prevent similar problems from occurring in November. Feel free to contact my husband at the email and phone number he shared, and he can pass along information to me too. Best wishes, Rachel Roberts Galbraith. We have three more. The next public comment is from Tony Reed. Dear members of the Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections, congratulations on a smoothly run primary election. As hard as you, your staff, poll workers, and community volunteers worked to ensure a fair and free primary election in Clarke County, there were inevitable problems created entirely by the limitations of the Dominion voting system that could not decipher some of the votes on 1,500 to 2,500 ballots. Therefore, I'm writing to urge the Clarke County Board of Elections to audit all 15,000 absentee votes to ensure that voters' intent, so interpreting X's, check marks, and other indicators, is correctly recorded on all ballots. The U.S. Constitution protects citizens' rights to have all of our votes counted. By personally examining the voting systems considered by the Safe Commission, many of us understand the limitations of the Dominion system selected by the Secretary of State's office. But now that we have this system, Georgia should adapt and enhance the system by automatically auditing all votes, both those recorded on the actual voting machines and those recorded on hand-marked absentee ballots, as a regular and expected step before certifying the election in each county. Clarke County therefore should not certify the primary election until the audit is completed. In addition, for the runoff in August and the general election in November, the ACC Board of Elections should provide extensive voter education and awareness so voters are able to mark their ballots correctly, thereby reducing the cleanup work necessary to make sure all votes are recorded and counted. Now that the need for a thorough audit has been identified by the vote review panel, it makes sense to factor the need for an automatic statewide county-by-county audit into all future elections as a way to counteract the limitations of the Dominion voting system. Signed, Tony Reed, PhD, Athens, Georgia. Next public comment is from Jessie Draper. She writes, "Thank you for having this meeting and hearing concerns. My concern is as follows. I voted via absentee and followed the instructions. I turned in my vote in the designated absentee bin outside the public library around 3:45 p.m. on Thursday, June 4th. It is still showing as not received on the Georgia My Voter page. I contacted the person I was directed to contact via phone and email, but have not heard back yet. I'm concerned my vote did not count despite my following instructions. Again, thank you for hearing my concern." And the last public comment is from Adam Shirley. It says, "Members of the board, thank you for calling today's special meeting. Thank you for reading public comment. I would like to reiterate how impressed I was by the hard work and determination demonstrated by everybody I interacted with on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday last week. Even though most of the election workers had already been at work for 12 hours when I arrived on Tuesday, they kept hammering away at the work and kept a positive attitude about it. To me, that reflects good leadership. I'm hopeful we can leverage that good leadership in honestly assessing how we can improve in the board's stated pursuit of true and perfect returns on our elections. To me, the most urgent area of improvement is the possibility of legitimate votes not having been counted. Please move swiftly to conduct a review of a representative sample of all 15,000 absentee ballots. If such a review uncovers more uncounted votes, I urge you to immediately order a full review of all 15,000 absentee ballots. If the roughly 300 ballots we adjudicated are any indication, I fear there may be hundreds, if not thousands, of uncounted votes waiting to be discovered. I'm thankful the State Election Board has given us a later deadline than usual. With your continued strong leadership, we can get this right. Thank you again for your service and for listening to my comments. Adam." That is public comment for this meeting. Let me just double check. I don't think there's anything that was submitted right before. No. Okay. So yeah, that's the public comment. And like I said, there were many other emails that were submitted prior, like last week and over the weekend and stuff, prior to announcing this meeting that we can also include in our meeting minutes that are all relevant to this meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to add that one of our practices after an election, with this large volume of absentee ballots, is to go through our envelopes, the yellow oath envelopes, to make sure that all voters receive credit for voting. And I just had the Galbraith's not applications, they're envelopes in my hand. We're going to make a copy of it to show that it was stamped and received on that day and to show them that their ballots did count. So I just want to make that known, that we'll be reaching out to them to let them know we have their ballots.
Thank you for saying that. And so we're still in the process of doing those, of scanning those yellow envelopes.
Well, if we weren't process of doing it, I just want to make sure that because that was such a large volume of of absentee ballots, that yes, with that large amount, we could have, not given somebody credit for voting. And because of that complaint, I was, I was just urged to do that this morning. So our staff is going through those 14,000 plus envelopes. And of course, that was done inadvertently. There was an error, but the ballot was counted. And we will reach out to the voters and let them know that.
Okay. And do you mind explaining, just quickly explaining, like to our community that might be watching, how, like, what the process is as far as, what do you do with that yellow envelope, and maybe there's a time or something, process time that takes, so some lag time to get to the database, possibly. I don't know. Would you mind just explaining that?
Yes, so when we receive the absentee ballots, the voted ballots, we stamp them in so that there's a date stamp. Then we examine the signature and make sure that the signature matches to the voter registration signature. We check off on the signature, and it's then that we go into our ElectionNet system and give the voter credit for voting. So we go in to say that the ballot that we issued was actually returned and will be counted. And then it goes into a batch. And then when we get those yellow envelopes batched, and we've been batching in 50, we slit the yellow envelope first, which is the oath envelope, and remove the content of that envelope to separate the identity of the voted information. And then that is inside of a sleeve. This particular time it was a sleeve rather than a white secrecy envelope. And then the next person separates the ballot from the sleeve, and then the ballot is then put into a batch for tabulation. So that yellow envelope serves as a very important document because that tells you a number of things. Number one, that a ballot was mailed. Number two, a ballot was received. On there, the dates there, the identity of the voter, because we verified the signature. And then we hold out that to make sure that it reconciles with what we have in our ENET system, that the voter actually got credit for voting.
Thank you. And how long will we keep those envelopes on file?
I want to think it's 2 years, but I'm not sure the retention on that.
Okay. Well, we do retain them, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they're retained at the courthouse through the clerk's office.
Okay. Thank you so much. Do any other members have questions or comments before we move on? Okay. New business. The reason we're here, June 9th, 2020 election issue, possibility that Dominion scanner and software did not count all votes marked on absentee ballots. The board received email from one of our vote review panel members, Mr. Adam Shirley, and he provided some very helpful feedback for the process in general, and a lot of praise for the board, for the staff, for the poll workers, for everybody that has been involved in this process, and then also some areas for improvement. And one thing that caught my eye immediately was he mentioned that there were, during the adjudication process of looking at, so for people who don't know this, which is probably most people, the vote review panel is responsible for adjudicating, or meaning to decide, to judge whether or not or how a voter voted. And our machine, our scanner, our software actually will flag certain things that on a ballot, Like, for example, if it's an oval that wasn't fully bubbled in, or somebody did check marks as an X's or dots, or somebody voted 2 times on one race, or somebody did a write-in, then, and there are maybe other reasons that would be flagged by the software, and the vote review panel would look at the ballot and adjudicate and decide, what the voters, try to determine what the voter's intent was. And if they can, then that intent was counted as a vote. And if they can't, then it's just voided. Director Sosby, does that pretty much sum it up? Or is what a vote review panel does?
Yes, so a vote review panel consists of 5 people. There is 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, appointed by those parties. There are 2 nonpartisans, because the state code says that if there's a nonpartisan election, then those 2 nonpartisan appointees or panelists are appointed by the judge, the Chief Superior Court judge, and then there's 1 that's appointed by the superintendent, you guys. So that board consists of 5 people, and when there is a ballot that needs to be adjudicated, or a decision need to be made on it, they vote on how, or the intent of how the voter marked the ballot. And but yeah, those are all appointed panelists.
Okay. And then, so Mr. Shirley said that during this process, when they were looking at the, I think 300 ballots, roughly, that needed adjudication, the vote review panel would see a green check mark next to things, vote, like the races where the vote had been, and like accepted by the system, recognized by the system, and tabulated. And then for things that had been flagged, it'd be like a red box around that race. And then there'd be other things that they just kind of happened to see on 30 to 50 ballots, is what he told me over the phone, that 30 to 50 ballots out of 300 had races where there was no green check mark saying that the vote had been counted. There was no red box saying, look over here, figure this out, adjudicate this. And then when they went and looked at it, like those votes, they hadn't actually been recognized by the system and tabulated into the election results, which means those votes weren't counted. But then the vote review panel corrected those that they recognized, but that draws a larger issue. And we've had several people email us concerned about other votes that the system might not have picked up and tabulated, the scanner and the software, on the absentee ballots. And the purpose of this meeting is to make a decision on how we're going to proceed to ensure that all votes have been counted on the absentee ballots.
Mr. Chairman?
I was just going to say, Director Sosby, I'm sorry, is that Ms. Till?
Yes. I was sitting at the table with Mr. Shirley and John Marsh, and they were discussing a lot of technical things. And I believe that Mr. Marsh might have some real insight. Somebody's speaking on, I think. I'm getting some feedback. Mr. Marsh seems like he has a real technical mind and could explain, because he was talking about the difference in the darkness of the marks on the ballots. And he was explaining how those machines read, as though he worked for some place that handled those, or he had some great knowledge. And I think it would be worth giving him a call and let him join our discussion on that, because I think he would give some real insight into how that works that most of us don't really understand.
Thank you, Ms. Till. I actually spoke to Mr. Marsh earlier today, and he did convey to me his perspective and his understanding of what was going on with the technology. And he is one of the several people that actually sent us an email. He didn't flag it for public comment, but it is going to go in our minutes. And he agreed with Mr. Shirley that, the things that I just described took place. 30 to 50 ballots had elections on them that where votes weren't counted, even though the voters marked those races, like they marked their votes on those races. And he's going to be he's going to be involved with how we proceed, depending on how this board votes today and how to proceed. But Mr. Marsh and I had a lengthy conversation, about probably half an hour conversation this morning about these things, and he actually suggests that that we do a full audit of all votes cast for this election. He wants to. He wrote that and he said over the phone that he wants voters to have confidence in the system, and that he thinks that we should just do a full audit of all votes that were on the electronic voting machines and on the ballots, the absentee ballots, and also that there should be at least one person from the Secretary of State's office involved, and one person from the Dominion company involved as well with that. But he and I spoke.
Well, I just thought it might help to give him a call and let him participate in it. I know you're telling us what Mr. Shirley said, but I just thought since he understood the system so well, that in a few minutes he could give us a very clear understanding and some questions that we have right now. So you don't want him to participate today?
It's not that I don't want him to participate. It's that we haven't set up a meeting in that way that we'd be calling members of our community. He sent an email. Would you like me to read his email?
Yes, if you would.
Okay. And again, I didn't read it earlier because it wasn't flagged as public comment, and he and I had the conversation earlier. But I really don't mind reading the email. It says, to the ACC Board of Elections, the absentee ballot vote review panel, of which I was a part, found a number of ballots having races with no votes, where in fact the voter had indicated a preference. These were on ballots that had been flagged by the system as being questionable. However, these particular races were not flagged. It concerns me that this occurred. However, understanding how the system does what it does leads me to the belief that the election was not materially affected by these issues, and that it is just as likely that a vote was not cast for one side or as another. And in fact, the machine and software will more consistently apply the criteria than human beings ever will. And then he has a series of bullet points. Number one, there should be an audit of this election to provide answers to these three questions. One, was there a problem with the scanning hardware itself? I believe that we will find that it worked as designed. Two, what were the problems with the absentee ballots that had issues, and was the result of the machine count skewed in one direction or the other? Three, was the overall election even-handed? This requires an audit of all ballots, not just the absentee ballots. This is to provide the public with confidence in the overall election process. I believe that the public should have confidence in the election and that a proper audit will reassure them. Number two, the audit should be conducted in conjunction with the state and with Dominion. Unfortunately, since we have an Associated Press headline aligning the Dominion software as faulty, then the person within the organization participate. Number three, the audit should be properly constructed to answer the above questions. Sample sets that are too large and expansive will introduce human errors into the audit process, and sample sets too small or improperly directed may not be statistically significant. While I cannot be there today, I would be happy to explain the process of how the system does what it does how and why we saw the problems that we did. Finally, let me restate that I do not believe that there is any reason to believe that the election was anything other than fair, or that there is any reason to doubt that the outcomes of this election. Please excuse my grammar and run-on sentences, but I have been tied up all day. It's 2:15 p.m. I do not have time to edit it. Sincerely, John Marsh. So, again, as I was saying, he agrees with Mr. Shirley's assessment that there were uncounted votes, and he's actually calling for a much larger, like a full audit, is what he's calling for, of all votes cast, is what he would like to happen. Does that satisfy your request, Ms. Till?
Yes, I think I agree with that, and I've received a number of phone calls and emails. I hear feedback, a number of phone calls and emails from the community saying that they believe that the state ought to get involved, and we should have a full audit on this because it has made the headlines across the United States, and we need people to have the reassurance that Georgia has a fair and secure way for everyone to vote. So I feel that this is really tantamount to what we are talking about right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Till. There are like 7 or 8 other emails that were sent last week over the weekend regarding this stuff. They weren't for public comment, and the board has these, and I have read these, and they will be included in the minutes. Do we think that I should read those, or do we think that that should just be posted in the minutes and the board will be informed by those?
Mr. Chairman,
Sir?
I think you should read them all.
Okay. How do other members feel about that?
I agree.
How many are there, Jesse?
Regarding these issues, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 more.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
can we ask, I agree you should read them too, but I worry about, can we ask the attorney if it's appropriate to read things that are not officially submitted as public record, even though they're relevant?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you, Rocky.
You're welcome.
I'm not sure if Jeb wants to chime in on this, but what exactly do you mean by things that are not public record, but that might be appropriate?
Was that a question directed to me?
Yeah.
Raffle. Okay. They were just not in response to the meeting. I don't know. To the meeting agenda.
So the question is, should we read aloud emails that were sent to the board that were not expressly intended as public comment? That's the question.
Wouldn't that be public record anyway?
I would assume.
But if they were not meant for public or purview, I mean, if they, you know, I'm confused, I would have to say, because I'm listening to what you're saying, Jesse, and they were not meant for public comment. If they were not meant for public comment, then the intent of the person that sent it was not for the public to view it. So how do we make the distinction between those that were for public comment and those who were not made to be a public comment? Is it in the addressing of it to the board and the way in which it was addressed to us, or what would make those two different?
After the agenda was published, then it is a official communication, public comment communication to us.
I think anything sent to the board is public comment. It's public record. We could read it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that too.
I'm going to go ahead and let you know that some of
Let
these
the attorneys deal with it.
emails have been titled for public comment, and they expressly mention public comment in the body of the email. The rest of the ones that I didn't read were not mentioned as, like, not titled for public comment, and they did not mention being read for public comment. So that's just, but I can turn over to the attorneys for this.
Well, I think what I would just say is you're absolutely right. Those of you who said that anything submitted to the board is a public record. There's certainly no confidentiality that gets attached to those. Even if someone were to put on this, I intend for this to be 100% confidential to the board. There's no obligation of confidentiality. So I think it's up to you all if you want to read them and if they're relevant to your agenda.
Yeah, so my intent was they were sent to the entire board, and we would, we'd be informed by them, and we're going to include them in the minutes. But if the board would like us to read them out loud, if we have consensus on the board.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read them? Thank you for doing that. It's a lot of work, and we'll all be enjoying listening to you read.
Yes, I agree.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I was just making sure that you can hear me. I think I was muted a minute ago, so I signed out, re-signed back in. But I think I heard most of what Attorney Hines said, and I think she's correct.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw you drop off the radar there for a second. So yeah, it's all public record. It's just a matter of whether or not it should be read aloud right now. And I believe the advice we're receiving is that if we deem it relevant, then it can be read aloud.
Correct.
And then we have a majority of the board, I believe. We have 2 so far, 3. We still Mr. Napper and.
I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and read it out loud, no problem. We have from Jacqueline Elsner, and this was sent to the board, but also to the Secretary of State and other people. Dear members of Georgia State Election Board, so it's sent to the State Election Board as well. I monitored the processing of absentee ballots in the Athens-Clarke County June non-primary election. Our election director, Charlotte Sosley, all her staff, and our members of our Board of Elections and Registration conducted a professional election in our county where over 15,000 ballots, or absentee ballots, were cast. I can testify to their hard work guiding our election under the most trying circumstances. Let's see. Let's work to correct problems together and stop pointing fingers. The voter review panel worked diligently over the night of June 9 through June 10th, adjudicating the ballots flagged by the scanner and tabulator supplied by Dominion. The 5 members of the voter review panel noticed the scanner/tabulator missed many vote marks on ballots. If the review panel had not picked up on this omission, votes are lost. The following is an example of what the voter review panel discovered. And then she just says, no red box around the contest meant the software had not flagged it for adjudication. No green highlighting meant the software had not recognized the vote. Thankfully, we noticed and unanimously instructed the software to record a vote for the indicated candidate. However, we were only being shown ballots that had at least one contest needing adjudication. If the software wasn't catching all of these, how many votes was the system failing to count? And then for emphasis, not counted. I ask you, the Georgia State Election Board, please work with the designer of this scanning software, cause these skip cases to be automatically flagged for adjudication. In addition, thinking ahead to the August runoffs in November of the general elections, state and local election officials should invest in voter education and awareness so we all properly mark our ballots next time. Candidates and our community worked hard for our June 9 election. Every vote counts, but only if every vote is counted. Sincerely, Jacqueline Elsner. So that is Jacqueline Elsner. This next one is also from Jacqueline Elsner. Dear members of the Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections and Registration, a huge thank you and cheer of appreciation to you 5 members of our Board of Elections and Registration. Y'all, each of you worked hours and hours to make our June 9 primary election work so well, with the time allotted for training and rolling out of new Dominion voting equipment. Another huge thank you and cheer of appreciation to every staff member of our Board of Elections and Registration Department. Each of them worked unceasingly for days and hours on end to ensure our June 9 primary election was successful. I had the opportunity to serve as a monitor of absentee ballot processing for an Athens-Clarke County nonpartisan candidate. I was at the 2555 Lexington Road facility for parts of June 4, June 6, June 8, and June 9 through the 10th, from about 4 p.m. to 4:20 a.m. I returned June 10 about 1:30 p.m. I watched the staff and board members work themselves beyond the bone, get this election right. As a monitor, I was not allowed in the EMS room where the panel reviewed absentee ballots, but Adam Shirley came out to the public room sometime in the small hours of June 10 to quickly explain what they were discovering about the scanner tabulator troubles. The panel had on their own noticed votes that were not caught by the scanner and tabulator, scanner/tabulator, votes that needed adjudicating. It was not done until the middle of the afternoon on June 10, and I am sure much work continued past the time I came home Wednesday afternoon. Our 5-member voter review board found a problem with the scanners/tabulators supplied by Dominion. Some ballots with voting anomalies were not flagged by the scanner/tabulator. The scanner/tabulator did not count those ballots. So, Clarke County voters' votes did not get counted. As many as 1,500 to 2,500 ballots possibly contained votes that were not tabulated. I ask you to instruct staff and, if appropriate, the voter review panel to review a 300 to 500 absentee ballot sample and tabulate the number of ballots containing improper marks and the number of selections made with those marks that the software had not recognized. If the results from this selection show that software neglected to recognize voters' choices, all the 15,000 plus absentee ballots need to be reviewed and corrected where appropriate. I know how deeply you are committed to the integrity of our Athens-Clarke County elections. Think of our local races for county commissioner, county school board, sheriff, and others. So much community effort poured into our June 9 primary. We want the equipment provided by Dominion to count every absentee vote, just as your staff labored for hours opening every envelope of every ballot. Sincerely, respect, Jacqueline Elsner. Cool. Thank you for those comments. All right. This next one is from Frida Hammett. Dear board members, please review a sample of the absentee ballots, 300 to 500 suggested, that are incorrectly marked to make sure the new software is reliable. From the comments and examples shared by Adam Shirley, this issue concerns me, as it appears to fail to record reasonable intentions by voters. The software should be catching these ballots for review. Please review a sample large enough to assure us that the software is working satisfactorily or not. Accurate voting is foundational to our democracy. Thank you, Frida Hammett. This next one is from Imani Scott Blackwell. Good afternoon. I'm writing to express my concerns about missed votes identified by the vote review panel following Tuesday's election. If their review revealed that approximately 1/3 of the 100 ballots adjudicated, then the Clarke County Board of Elections needs to review a sample of at least 300 to 500 votes to determine whether or not the initial adjudication errors revealed are anomalies or consistent at a larger sample size. This review should tabulate 1, the number of ballots containing improper marks, and 2, the number of selections made with those marks that the software had not recognized. From there, if this body finds consistent results with the initial adjudication after official review, then all 15,000 absentee ballots need to be reviewed and corrected as needed in order to ensure that our democracy is being executed with fidelity. I appreciate the work this body has done thus far and understand these irregularities reflect the new software and are not the fault of local election workers. Nonetheless, voting is a critical component of a citizen's ability to participate in the political process. Any potential errors need to be identified so we can move into the November election with faith that our vote will be counted. Best, Imani Scott Blackwell. For that, Ms. Blackwell, Scott Blackwell. The last one I see is from Regina Smith. It says, "Dear folks, I'm done blindly accepting what may be state government's false assumptions about the accuracy of our new voting system and how it counts and tabulates absentee ballots. We can no longer simply move on without going back and determining unequivocally that those machines are accurately recording votes. It is simply good common sense at this juncture to take some time right now to go back and do an audit to verify the new machines are tabulating absentee votes correctly. Assumptions at this point that everything is functioning correctly could be far off base. You won't know until you go back and test. Too much is at stake, and I'm one Georgian who remains skeptical about how accurate our new system really is. Give us citizens the satisfaction of believing that the new system isn't flawed. Help us have faith in the new system. Conduct an audit of our absentee ballots and verify how and if the machines recorded votes correctly. At this juncture, as we move toward the critical November election, it is imperative that you all, as our Board of Elections and our election supervisor, give us faith in the system that has been laid out for us to use. Many thanks, Dr. Regina Smith." And that, I believe, is the last comment about this issue. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier Mr. Shirley's extensive email, a very lengthy email that had a lot of great insights, and we're definitely taking these into going to have these to inform us. Should I read that or no?
I think that went out publicly and many people read it. I appreciate you reading those other letters. I think it would be good to balance Mr. Shirley with John Marsh's view on it. If we could get his viewpoint, and it seems like everybody wants to know that the vote is secure, that these mismarks on the machine, were they voter error or were they machine error? And many of them, and I agree with them, are calling for a full audit. And I think the voters in Clarke County deserve that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, thank you. We actually read Mr. Marsh's email. We've definitely got his perspective in the mix here. Okay, so we have options here. Director Sosby, we have options here, and I'm wondering if you would explain the differences for us. One way to go about doing this is to just call back the vote review panel and to expand our review, given what we've learned when they were doing their vote review panel thing and adjudication. We could go that route, and we could do a sample possibly of I used some statistical methods like calculator that I found online, and it said like we have 15,000 ballots. We would have 95% confidence level and a margin of error of less than 5% if we took a sample of 400 ballots. And then based on what we find there, that could determine if we continue with the remaining 15,000 or if we leave it where it is. So that's an option. Another option is to do an audit. And there's like partial audits and full audits, I believe. So Director Sosby, I think an audit's going to be very different. They have different regulations, different laws and statutes, different rules about what can and can't be done and what they're looking for exactly than, say, just having our vote review panel go back and ensure that all votes are counted in the way that they would do adjudication, looking at ballots and looking for votes that weren't counted. Would you share with us your thoughts on this?
Yes, I would just tell you that if we decided to recount all of the ballots, 14,000 some odd ballots, that we already know what it's like to do it on election night. We know how many people it took. We knew how long it took. So I hope that will be taken into consideration. And that we will all be prepared to go through the whole process for the long haul. So if we only did a batch, say we pick certain batch numbers to audit, that could be easily done with the ICC, which is the scanner, where the vote review panel would come in and look at those ballot images, and it would tell how the scanner read it, and we could compare that to the manual adjudication as in actually looking at each individual ballot of that batch. And it all goes to how the voter marked the ballot. So the instruction says to color in a bubble, and there were several ballots that had check marks, or they circled the name, or put an X in the box. And just with, most bubble, I'm gonna say the lottery, standardized test, we're told to color in the bubble. And usually it'll say what color pen, but the system software is set up to identify where a voter might have intended to vote. And so going by a certain percentage of that bubble will determine if the software picked that particular vote up. So if you decided to rescan like certain batches and then compare it with what was and what was actually identified by the scanner through the first election, the actual election, that would be a route to take. Then you could just stop and compare it to what was adjudicated in the software. But
If I speak real quick.
Sure.
We've already got the images of all the ballots, right?
That's correct.
And I've been told that there is, like, for each of those ballots that were scanned in, absentee ballots that were scanned in, there's the system has a summary of that ballot saying, that for this race the voter marked that, for that race the voter marked that, for this other race there is no vote counted for that. I'm not sure that it would be necessary to rescan everything. If we've got everything, like, we could just look at the images and compare that to what the system registered.
That's right.
As a vote. And much like the vote review panel was doing, when they did adjudication, they were just looking at the image and comparing that to whether or not like it was actually voted. Like they compared the non-flagged and non like highlighted in green or checked in green pieces that with what was actually counted, and they realized that they weren't counted, and they changed it to count that vote. We could use that same sort of approach with the machinery instead of having to rescan everything. If you know, if the board and if staff think that would be preferable rather than rescanning everything.
Director Sosby, can I ask you a question? Director Sosby,
Yes.
you've discussed that way of just kind of piecemeal of going through those same ballots that were already seen by most of the people that were going through those. Can you describe if we get a full audit by the state and bring Dominion in, what that would be like? Because this has made national news, and this is really a big deal, not just in Georgia, but in the entire United States about what's going on here. I've got somebody's feedback, and I would say to restore voter confidence that we ought to have a full, open, transparent audit so we can assure the voters, everyone that voted, that their voted count, that we saw their vote, that it wasn't just us, that we had the company come in and the company understands how these machines read. It's not just what we think we understand, but we would have Dominion come in, have somebody that really knows what they're doing, somebody from the top, and also have the state come in, and that way we would have a clear conscience that everyone that took the time to vote, to fill out those ballots, to drop them off downtown or in one of the drop boxes or stand in line, that we're not after whatever's the shortest, the quickest, and the easiest. We want to be sure that these voters have full confidence in the Board of Elections, that we go full out for them because they went full out for us to come down and vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and I would guess a request from the board to Dominion and the state would be sufficient if that's what the board's consent is.
You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. I believe there was a question in there about what that process would entail and how that would differ from using
You have your mic on and the sound is bouncing back. It makes it difficulty. I have to pay a little more attention than I necessarily would. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Fambro. So I believe Ms. Sotheby, the question was, what would that process be for a full-on audit of the entire election, where involving from Dominion, a member of that company, and also I think she said.
I'm sorry. Please cut your mic off.
So I'm looking at. Lisa, would you mind going through and muting anybody whose mic isn't mine, real quick? Thanks. Is that better, Ms. Ambro? Okay. So, Director Sutherland, do you mind explaining what that process would be for an audit of the entire election, including the BMD votes and all 15,000 or 14,971 or whatever absentee ballots?
Um, my guess would be that, as I stated, you would make a request, the board, to have them come and be a part of the, audit. And we would call in our vote review panel, of course, and it would need to be advertised. Um, we would inform the parties as well as the nonpartisan candidates that this audit was going to take place. So that would mean if they wanted to send representatives to witness the audit, they could. Um, then, of course, the board and staff. So we would need to have, again, we're still practicing social distancing, depending on how that is, we need to be very careful about who all is in the room. But we want everybody to be able to witness it who wanted to. And I can imagine it would take several hours to go through the process of auditing all 14,000 ballots. Consideration of overtime, of course, of our staff, which is not foreign to us. You know that. You spend 36 hours on election day counting absentee ballots. Imagine the overtime. So that's basic, but the start, I guess, what needs to be done is the board decide today if you want to do the audit. It needs to take place before certification. Certification is on Thursday. So it would need to be done, I would think, on Wednesday. So it'd be moving pretty fast pace, hoping that it only takes us 8 hours to process them so that there is time to do the certification. Certification's due on Friday, so want to make sure we certify Thursday as planned.
Director Sosby, thank you for that. When it comes to the BMDs, that would be a process of just scanning in those paper ballots that were generated at the polling location, and then
we're getting feedback on you. I don't know what's going on, but I'm getting some pretty bad feedback on you.
yeah, I don't see any. Is it still going on? Is this okay?
Yes, it goes bzzz, bzzz, bzzz.
Thank you for that, Will. Is it any better now?
I'm still hearing it. It's just a buzzing sound. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, thank you. But the audit of the BMDs, Director Sosby, would be running, like scanning the QR codes of all the paper ballots that were generated. Is that correct?
I am not sure about that, Mr. Chairman. I know previously through a electronic voting, there was just an upload of the memory card that was part of the recount or the audit. So I'm not sure. I haven't been able to, I'm not even sure if they've published the audit process yet. I think they've tested it in another county. So it'd be interesting to find out, and I'm sure I could get more directions from the state and from Dominion on how we would actually audit the BMDs.
Okay. What I want to make sure we get out of this is that all votes are counted, but also we need to know how many votes were not counted the first go around. I don't want it just to turn into, well, does this affect the election or not? The outcome of the election. Like, we need to know that all votes were counted, and simply running through going through it all over again without actually comparing to what was done previously is not going to necessarily tell us exactly that that all votes were counted. I really think that when it comes to these absentee ballots, we really need to look at the scanned image, look at what the software tells us was the votes that were tabulated for that particular ballot, and confirm that that it picked them all up, or identified discrepancies in votes that need to be counted that weren't counted. So, and again, that would be a vote review panel, like just continuing to do that process. If we want to do an absence, if we want to do an audit, Director Sosby, I would want that to be a county level audit. And then we could have assistance from the state or from Dominion, but it would be our audit. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And with an audit, we will be able to identify if any votes weren't counted and how many of those were, how many ballots, things like that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is my understanding.
Okay. So I see some people in the community are asking for a sample size that reflective of the larger process. Sorry, the larger size, like doing like 400 ballots, the larger 15,000. That would be statistical representation. Other people seem to be asking for a full-on audit for everything.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would like, so we've done some research on this. We learned about, this yesterday, and I'd like to get some clarification. When we look at the elections code, we're not sure we see this term audit used. And we have to, and now, if you're talking about a recount, that's clearly talked about in the code. I would like, and what you were just getting to was a point when you indicated in your communication with yesterday about looking at 400 ballots. I had talked with the chairman, to the director, Ms. Sosby, this morning about a proposal she had that I thought was something we might could do initially is workable, and she hasn't had a chance to basically get that proposal to the board yet. I'd like for the board to hear what she has indicated, because you have another issue or request for a recount in your Board of Education race, and this might allow us to address that matter too. So if Director Sosby, if you could talk to the board about what we discussed this morning, that would satisfy, would attempt to satisfy and get voter integrity concerns, address those, but also that recount issue.
Okay. I think that's a good idea, but I think that we should hear that.
Yes, so I refer to code section 21-2-495, and it's the procedure for recounts. And it just specifically says that the superintendent may, upon its own motion, order a recount of all ballots for a particular precinct or precincts for one or more office in which it shall appear to be a discrepancy or error, although not apparent on the face of the returns. And it tells that it should be held prior to any time prior to certification, and before making the recount that we should inform each party or body affected by the recount. Each party or each candidate may present in person, and each such party may send 2 representatives to be present at the time of the recount. And it should appear that the original count by the poll officers was incorrect. If it was incorrect, such returns and all papers being prepared by the superintendent shall be corrected accordingly. So, yes, so there was a request for the school board 2, I believe it is. And so we could address both of those matters. Now, the code section also goes on to say that that's 21-2-495 C1, I believe. that there should be a difference of 1/2 of 1% of the total votes between the two candidates, which apparently was not that less. It was actually more of a margin. But that request was made to do a recount. So the board wanted to address that. We have that. So it just, again, it depends on you, the board, how you want to do it. But that would be my recommendation, is to pick precincts or a particular race, and if we wanted to actually recount our audit.
It looks like I'm looking in this handy dandy elections code annotated book here that I was provided by our staff. And the index audits is under 21-2-498. And I don't want to run into limitations like that seem to be defined there. 21-2-498.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Ms. Hines has looked at that code section. If you could let her speak to that code section and what it indicates it means. And let me say, if we can figure out, I just want to make sure we talk about this term audit, and we coordinate, make sure we're acting in accordance to your powers and authorities as a board, and that's all I'm trying to do. And so when you read that code section, Sherry, what is it? What do you see it's talking about?
Yeah, I was looking at this when you started speaking about audits, Mr. Chairman, and it seems to me that this is not a general audit authority. And again, I just began looking at it, so I'm happy to research this. But it talks about a specific pre-certification tabulation audit, and it talks about it happening no later than November 2020, which seems to me that it's a specific sort of maybe one-time type of audit that needs to happen. And I'm not sure, and I'd like to research that more, but it definitely doesn't seem to be the sort of general authority that we see in that section 495, where, at any time you can do a recount or a recanvass. This seems to be a specific requirement that needs to be done. And they talk about this risk limiting audit pilot program and things like that. It just seems a little bit different, but it may give us the authority. I just would like the time to research this further.
Thank you. What about, I'm not sure we have to call it a recount because we're still in the process of counting, aren't we? So wouldn't we just be continuing to do the process of counting when we recognize that the machinery and the software didn't produce an accurate count? So we're going back to ensure that, as we're continuing to count, we're working to ensure that we have an accurate count. Is that, do we need to call it a recount and go through that, or could we just continue with the process that we're doing and go back and look at these absentee ballot images and again compare them to what the system says it registered as a vote, it tabulated as a vote for each of those ballots, and they identify the errors and correct the errors? And that's a question for, I guess, Mr. Drake.
Well, if we can't, when you talk about this audit, I'm not sure that procedure is set forth in the code. I'd like, and I'm not sure. I'm happy if we can do that, but when you're just making up, so.
Mr. Drake, can I clarify real quick? I'm not asking for an audit right now. I'm just saying, can we finish counting the votes?
I thought well, let me ask Ms. Sosby to clarify that about whether the votes you're finished counting those.
So what's been counted is considered unofficial because there are UOCAVA ballots that have to be counted that were postmarked on June 9th that we could receive through June 12th. So there will be more votes added to our unofficial results as well as our provisional ballots. So basically all the votes are counted that were ready or presented to be counted on election day, but the results don't come official until we add those UOCAVA ballots and the provisional ballots. So we're not still counting, so to speak.
And so, you know, I think we should act in accordance with our authority, with your authority as the superintendent of election, the board of elections, which you are the superintendent. I'm perfectly comfortable with Ms. Sosby looking and talking with Dominion Secretary of State to see if they're familiar with this audit. Ms. Hines' initial indication is that statute you quoted, Mr. Chairman, is not really applicable in this type of thing. So to me, any type of audit you do really is, you just have to do a recount, see if the ballots have been counted correctly. The statute that Ms. Sosby pointed out to you allows you to do that in certain precincts or even certain races, so that you don't, you don't do the whole thing. If we do the whole thing, my question to Ms. Sosby is going to be, can you have that done to certify the election results on Thursday? I mean, that's why a more limited scope might be good for the board to see and then make a determination, because then you're going to be looking at not certified timely, which I understand that has happened in the past. Ms. Sosby have to comment on what that means, from a practical standpoint. Is there any issue? I would ask Ms. Sosby, what would be the effect of not being able to have all the votes recounted if that's what the board wanted, and then not be able to certify on Thursday?
That could mean a violation of the state election board rule.
Okay, and that may be something the board is willing not to, is not concerned about, because you want to make sure that all the votes are counted. But the reality is, at this point, this board of elections, I think, has done what it's required to under the law. Now, if you want to order a recount, that's within your authority. I don't know, and Ms. Hines can look further into it, but I mean, she has the ability to research pretty quickly what this audit might look like and what we be really accomplishing by how. So that's my concern.
I'm not stuck on an audit. All I want to do is finish counting these ballots and make sure that all the people of the votes that were cast are counted. That's it. I don't need to call it an audit. I don't need to call it a recount. I don't need to call it anything. All I need to do is we need to finish, and the way I view it is we're not actually done counting these votes yet, because we know that the machine didn't actually count all the votes. Like, we've seen evidence of that. So, while we might have gone through the procedure to count the votes that were readily available at that time, clearly the machine, we have evidence that the software and the machine didn't actually do it. So we are still in the process of counting ballots and counting votes. It's like, if back in the day when this was all done by paper, in some counties, if it's in some states, they do it all by paper. If another box of ballots was found, like, we're not done counting, so we don't need to call it a recount. We don't need to call it an audit. We just need to actually have a process in place where we go in there and make sure that all the votes that were cast are counted. So I don't need to get stuck on the audit thing. I just want to make sure that all the votes that were cast are counted.
Well, I apologize. I don't understand.
I see, Ms. Fambro.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not able to understand what you're saying. I thought Ms. Sosby just said the votes have been counted except for certain of the military ballots that are coming in. I would ask Ms. Sosby, Director Sosby, are there ballots in your mind that have not been counted? That I understand what happened here is that ballots my understanding, this concerns the absentee ballots that were not properly marked. It's like a Scantron when you're in school. You bubble in the little thing, and this is voters. If you mark anywhere inside that bubble, the machine would note that ballot. If you check outside the bubble, the machine didn't pick that up, and it wasn't. So that's what Director Sosby, I understood this morning when we talked, was the issue here. Are you saying that those ballots where somebody perhaps checked outside the bubble, that we know where those ballots are, and it's just as simple as going back and verifying? I mean, I would ask Director Sosby to explain to the board what happened with those ballots where it was not marked inside, and are those ballots identifiable? It sounds like Chairman Evans believes that it's just as simple as going back and counting those votes. Is that the case? Those ballots, those absentee ballots that meet that description, is that the case, Director Sosby?
So if a voter does not mark within the guideline of that particular race, the ballot is, that vote is considered a no vote for that race. So it's all about following the instructions of coloring in the bubble versus putting a check mark in the bubble, which would not cover a good bit of that bubble, for it to, for the software to pick up that this is an actual vote and not just a mark on the ballot.
Well, Director Sosby, my follow-up question on that would be, if someone, my understanding was you indicated this morning that if a ballot had been marked, someone just drew a line through it instead of bubbling the whole thing, it would pick up, the system picked that up, and the vote reviewers were able to look at that one and determine intent. Is that correct?
Yes, and that was prior to my conversation with Dominion this morning or this afternoon.
Okay.
So the probability of, I want to say 18% of that bubble has to be filled in for it to register that there's an actual vote. 18% of it. If it's less than 18% of that bubble filled in, then it's considered a no vote.
And when you say that, Director Sosby, my question would be, you're saying it's considered a no vote. Are you basing that on state administrative guidelines or state law?
I'm basing that on the guidelines that was given to me just recently through Dominion.
Hey, you mind if I just clarify? I think that what Dominion provided, Director Sosby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is what the machine does. It's not what the law says, it's what the machine does. Is that accurate?
Well, the law says that you're supposed to color in the bubble.
I understand, but what I'm getting at is the 18% or whatever you just said, they're telling us how the machine was calibrated. And if it was anything less than that, then it didn't pick it up.
And that's with but this particular kind of scanner.
Well, what I would say to the board, based on what Director Sosby is saying is, and I need to verify this, if there is a state election law or regulation that says that if you don't bubble in the thing, it's a no vote, I'm not sure that this U.S. Superintendent of Elections have the discretion to start looking at each one of these ballots individually and filling in the bubble, basically. I mean, I would ask the director, who's more knowledgeable about this than I am, do you think the board has that discretion under state election law? And that's what we have to look for, is what's your authority? I'm not saying, I understand the prudence and the greatness of that and wanting to do that, but you have to understand what is your authority.
I understand. So 21-2-438C. 21-2-438, Charlie.
Okay, what does that say?
Notwithstanding any of the other provisions of this chapter to the contrary, in accordance with the rules and regulations of the State Election Board promulgated pursuant to paragraph 7 of Code Section 21-2-31, here's the piece. If the elector has marked his or her ballot in such a manner that he or she has indicated clearly and without question the candidate for whom he or she desires to cast his or her vote, his or her ballot shall be counted, and such candidate shall receive his or her vote. Notwithstanding the fact that the elector, in indicating his or her choice, may have marked his or her ballot in a manner other than as prescribed by this chapter.
Well, that provision, hearing you read it in and of itself sounds good, but I need to look at it and make sure it applies to this type of ballots and just make sure. I mean, I can't, I'm not saying you're not right or wrong. I'm just saying I want to read it and make sure. That's all. Director Sosby, Sherry, can you pull that section up?
Yes, I've got it up, and I was just looking at the notes of decision. I think his reading of it is certainly correct. I think we just have to be really careful and think back to the whole hanging Chad debacle, from the early 2000s. That it does specifically say indicated clearly and without question. So if there's any kind of other marks, I'm assuming that that's going to be something where it would raise a question. But there's a handful of cases on this, so I can look at those two and do additional research on it.
That's the purpose of the voter review panel, and of this board as superintendent, is to decide, and try to determine whether or not this elector has indicated, I'm going to try to use the clearly and without question, the candidate for whom he or she desires to cast his or her vote. That's why we have a vote review panel. That's why we have Board of Elections. So that's our job.
Well, I would just say that as I'm sitting here, and it may be this is not an issue I've dealt with before in the past. And I doubt many other communities in Georgia have dealt with this. I'm not able to fully advise you on what you're trying to do because I haven't researched it thoroughly enough. And so, that's all I can say at this point. I would like I'm not even sure I understand you understand what you're wanting to do, to be honest with you, the whole board. I hear, and what I know you can do is a recount, which I think would count the whole thing. I know that for sure. And whether you can, I don't even know how you start doing what you're saying. Are you thinking about taking a ballot at a time and looking at it and see if it was correctly recorded? I think that's going to be a very lengthy process. And again, I hear what you're saying. The statute may allow that. I haven't looked at it enough to say I'm confident to say that Ms. Hines feels like it does say that. But I apologize. I'm not more legally versed on this concept of an audit and reviewing.
You don't need to apologize. I'll just say this: that we have right now all 15,000 whatever 971 or 791 whatever ballots. We have the images stored right now in a database, and we also have the software that can pull that up and show us the ballot that was marked. Just like they've already done this. They've already been doing this with the vote review panel. That's exactly what they did. It was a set in front of a computer screen. And the only difference is they recognize, wow, this software isn't actually flagging and all the things that need to be flagged, nor counting all the things that need to be counted. So it's the same kind of process. We just would sit down, and these ballots have already been batched into groups of 50. So they have batch numbers, and they have within those batches, they have numbers assigned to them to identify them. So all it would be is just doing what the vote review panel did, but not expecting to see any red boxes to say adjudicate this, going back and looking for areas where the software didn't pick up the vote. There's a report, a status, a thing that can be clicked on in the software, from what I'm told, that says, hey, this is what we got from this ballot right here. On this election, they voted this. On this election, they voted that. On this election, there is no vote. Well, on the elections that there are no vote, we would just look at the ballot, see if there actually was a vote, and if there was, we would count that vote.
Director Sosby, so you're the director of elections. I would ask you, based on what you've heard, what would you advise the Board of Elections is appropriate step based upon their concern that certain absentee ballots were not counted to reflect voter intent?
Mr. Chairman, I think there is.
Just a moment, please. Let's let Director Sosby respond.
My thought would be to look at the images that are stored in the scanner, because the image, the audit mark image is going to tell us exactly what the scanner read. That would be my suggestion. Would I do that on all the ballots? No, I would not do that. I think let's pick a batch, and identify those and go from there, because on the ballot, it marks at the bottom, it tells you exactly what the scanner read. And if it's been adjudicated, it'll have a second audit mark to tell what the adjudication read, or what the vote review panel decided based on the adjudication.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, Director Sosby. I think we're saying, you and I are saying, take a sample, large enough to be reflective of the whole, go through and look at the images, look at what the software says, look at the votes it counted from that ballot, compare that to what's actually marked on the ballot, and if there's any discrepancy there, fix it. And then once we've done that with a large enough sample size, if there is no issue, then hopefully that we can say, statistically speaking, that sample is representative of all the ballots. If there are issues, then we can, again, that sample is representative of all the ballots, statistically speaking, and we need to continue identifying any discrepancies within the remaining 14,000 whatever ballots. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, I have a question. After you've gone through whatever process it is that you've decided to not do a complete audit and not bring in the state and not bring in Dominion, and you do your own little audit or whatever it is you want to call your little batch pick and check, and you find that there were 10 votes that were missed, how does that really give the voter through the entire state of Georgia that's made the headlines across the entire United States the confidence that when we vote for the president, that these machines that you keep talking about, that it's voter error, that the voter made this scratch, the voter didn't fill in the circle, the voter didn't read the directions, and the machine is supposed to pick up on what the voter meant when they didn't read the directions and do it. So it's not the scanner's fault that the voter did not follow the directions, didn't read the directions, didn't fill in the circle, filled in half the circle, drew a happy face. Whatever they did, the machinery worked, it seems like, everywhere else, and I find it very questionable that it didn't work in Athens, but it worked everywhere else, or the majority of places. So what would be the outcome if you find 10 more votes this time? What does that mean for the future? We need to make the public aware that this was voter error, there were scratches, it wasn't properly marked. It had nothing to do with the machinery, because we have many more elections ahead of us, and I think it's a greater picture than what kind of little happy face or something somebody drew on their ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Till. I see Ms. Fambro's hand. Go ahead, Ms. Fambro.
I'm reading over what the comments were, especially from the people who were on the voter review panel, and it's a wide berth of what I just heard from Ms. Teal, because what I'm reading is, and I want to read this, the panel noticed the scanner tabulator missed many votes marks on ballots. Now we can get into a discussion about what those marks were, but if those marks had enough over 18% filled in and they didn't catch it, then we got a real big problem. The panel, if the review panel had not picked up on this omission, votes are lost. The following is an example of what the voter review panel discovered. No red box around the contest meant the software had not flagged it for adjudication. No green highlighting meant the software had not recognized the vote. Thankfully, we noticed and unanimously instructed the software to record a vote for the indicated candidate. However, we were only being shown ballots that had at least one contest needing adjudication. And what the voter panel is saying is that These were the only ones presented to us. So we want to know if there were others in the batch, and I think we're on the right trail to do a sampling out of each batch that would give us a large enough sampling so that would kind of reassure us. And Jesse has mentioned this before, that we are doing the right thing. And I don't think that we should not pay attention what the voter panel is saying, because if that's the case, then we don't need them. And if we go back and say we don't need you, then that makes us counterfeit. So if these people have taken the time to be on this panel and done this, then I think we should have a very large ear to what they are saying. And we just can't go out here and say that the voters made all these mistakes, because I know that couldn't possibly be true. I just can't believe that everything has to be put on the voter. And we were put here to figure out whether it's the voter error or whether it's the machine error. Some people might not like it if we find out it's machine error, but it has to be corrected, because I'm for an honest and fair election in November. And if we don't get this straight now, when will we? And another thing I'd like to ask Director Soulsby, what is the time on Friday morning that we have to turn in our certification?
Thank you, Ms. Fambro. Ms. Director Sosby, when is the deadline? The actual, okay, this is like, if you don't meet this deadline, you're late deadline for the certification.
Okay, so usually it has to be uploaded. Now, this is our first time using the system. Usually it has to be uploaded on Friday by 5 p.m. and has to be at the state the driver service. It has to be over there by 10 o'clock Monday morning. So I haven't received any OEBs, any official election bulletins lately to tell exactly what time, but that's the usual, 5 p.m.
So COB Friday, as long as we've got the data uploaded, we're good, right?
Yeah, that's until I hear from the official election bulletins that we haven't received yet.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Fambro, Ms. Still. And just to be clarified, I've been told that the actual the rate, Director, so you mentioned 18%.
It's 12. I apologize. It's 12.
Okay. Because I'm getting conflicting reports on what the percentage should be. 13. I'm been told 13%, not 18%. But either way, I hear some people saying something about it's on the voter, it's on the voter. But the thing is, we've got equipment that apparently can't detect what the human eye and the human mind can detect. All right, or at least it didn't do that. Maybe it can, but it just didn't. I don't know. But if a person, a human being, can be like our vote review panels members can look at the ballot and say, okay, the machine didn't catch this, but we caught it. We're going to make this right. That's what we should be doing as a board. And anyways, our job is to report the votes as they were cast and to send up a true account and that is correct and true. And if we just say, oh, well, that's up to the vote, that's the voter's fault, we're not doing our job. We're not doing our job if we just blame the voter. So I just read a statute that says that if, as long as the voter clearly indicates it, doesn't matter if they filled it in with a bubble or whatever, like we shall, it says, not we may, the board, like superintendent shall count that vote. So it is our job to make sure that all votes are counted as cast, whether or not that person filled it in with a bubble, with a dot, circled it, checked it, whatever. As long as we can tell what they were trying to do, then that's what we're supposed to do.
I don't think that's possible unless you sit down and look at every single ballot.
I understand. That's what I'm saying is we should do a sample, is what I'm saying, and look at a statistically representative sample. Anyone that knows anything about statistics or research or anything like that can say, like, they understand that you can have a 95% confidence level with a less than 5% margin error if, you know, for a total of 15,000, if you got a total of 15,000 in the population or in the ballots, and you do about 400 ballots, you're going to have a statistically reliable representative sample of the larger 15,000. And that's what I'm suggesting we start with.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to add again, as the attorney for the board, I think, and Ms. Hines has been researching this the whole time. She says she thinks that the only quote unquote normal audit process is a recount or recanvass petition. And I think what y'all are talking about is more of a recount. Why would there be objection to following what Director Sosby has recommended to the board related to utilizing that Board of Education race as the model? And she could say that again to the board. We firmly know that's within the confines of what's the board allowed for the board to do. We also know that it would accomplish checking what the board wants to check. And that's all I'm going to say on that issue. You know,
I can respond to you right now, Mr.
We'll
Drake.
be the one that has to deal with
Mr. Drake, I can respond to you right now. All right, so restricting this to just one race does not accomplish what the board wants to do. What the board should be doing is reporting all votes as cast. And if we just restrict it to one race and we ignore all the other races, then that is not accomplishing what the board is meant to do. Like, so I'm not saying that Director Sosby's suggestion is not a good idea as far as in general the concept. I'm saying we should definitely shouldn't be restricting it to just one race on the ballot. We had so many races on the ballot, and that would mean that if we ignore all those other races, then all those, if there's any votes in other races that the machine didn't pick up, then we're just letting, like, basically throwing those voters' votes out the door. And that's not acceptable. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be making sure that we go through and count all the votes. So if we can look at the vote, at the ballot, and like I said, and compare it to what the machine actually picked up, the software actually picked up and registered as a vote, or tabulated as a vote, like, it's not going to take, like, it's not going to be impossible to do what we need to do to make sure that all the votes were counted. I've talked to 4 of the 5 vote review panelists, and they, from what I understand, they were doing like 66 per hour. So if we did 400 of those as a sample size, and they would need to, it wouldn't mean to be just like selected by, you know, just a one race or, you know, one batch, because each batch is only 50. If we did 400, and then that would take about maybe 6 hours to figure that out. And that would be a statistically representative sample. And I get that some people are saying we should do all of them. If it turns out that in that sample, that it shows that there were errors in that sample, then yes, we should go ahead and do all of them. That's what I believe. But if others believe we should go ahead and just do all 14,971 of them, then that's, you know, and the majority of the board decides that, then okay, we can go ahead and do that. But again, it's not impossible to make sure that we're doing our jobs and making sure that all the votes are counted as they were cast. And that's the goal of the board, not just to look at one race.
I have a
Would you
question.
consider looking
I see you.
at,
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Fanbro.
How many batches are there?
14,971 divided by 50.
Okay, so I'll have to get on my calculator for that.
Mr. Chairman, if you counted the ballots.
299. Sorry, go ahead, Ms.
How many?
299 with some remaining, so 300. But go ahead, Ms. Director Sosby.
If you consider the precincts that all fall in Board of Education 2, then that's 5 precincts, not specifically looking at that race, but looking at every ballot that precinct, in those precincts that have Board of Education 2. That would consist of 1A Winterville Train Depot, 1B Tennis Center, 2A J.J. Harris, 2B Howard B. Stroud, and 4A Transit. That's 5 precincts that Board of Education 2 has.
How many would that be, Director Sosby, absentee ballot was?
Ooh, I wouldn't know.
May I suggest something?
I could pull a report.
Go ahead.
We could do a blind pool, pulling 2 ballots from each batch, and we would have fairly so over the probably about 600 samples. Do a blind pool, and I say that with emphasis on it. Do a blind pool from each batch. We end up with about 600, and do those instead of, we just out here willy-nilly. We just out here just, I don't know, maybe pulling stuff out the sky. But let's go back to the blind pool and do about 600 ballots, and we'll go from there. That seems fairly simple to me. And we have over a statistical analyst that we should have. We have over the number.
Ms. Fambro, to your point, we can't actually extrapolate if it's not a randomized sample. We can't extrapolate to the larger 15,000 if we just artificially select these populations at these precincts in this precinct, or these 5 precincts. So it would need to be more randomized than.
But we're going to get those 600 from all the ballots that we have. That 600 is going to be pulled from.
You're muted. You're muted.
Those 600s would be pulled from all the 15,000 that we have. And if they were done in batches, then the best thing would be to pull from each batch. That means that every batch that we have has been touched by this statistical analyst, and not just 5 precincts.
Yeah. So I think I hear us moving in a direction of doing a batch large enough for statistical analysis so we can extrapolate the results to the larger body. And I think that one idea that's put forth by Director Sosby was to do it in the precinct that voted for CCSD Board of Education District 2. And then I hear Ms. Fambro saying we shouldn't do that. We should have it more randomized at larger sample size. I think I heard you say 600. Are there any other ideas or comments or any motions to be made at this point regarding this issue?
Mr. Chairman, could I make a point?
Go for it.
So if you look at that section that allows the recount and recanvass as the 21-249 that Ms. Osby referenced, I think unfortunately that it doesn't allow you to do a randomized sampling across the entire system. It says that you can order the recount of all the ballots for a particular precinct or precincts for one or more offices, in which it shall appear that a discrepancy or error, although not apparent on the face of the returns, has been made. So if you wanted to do multiple precincts, I think you could. If you wanted to do, one race out of certain precincts, I think you could, but I don't think you could just pull a sample of ballots from races generally. Does that make sense?
It does. Could we just randomly select the precincts?
Sure. I mean, it does.
Closer to statistical.
Yeah, let me back up really quickly. It does say that in which it shall appear that a discrepancy or error has been made. But if the assumption is that there may have been a discrepancy or error across the board, I think as long as you state that as your reason for sampling them randomly, I think you probably could.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. Is we suspect that this has been an issue, not constrained to just one location precinct, but to across the board. So, yeah, I think that so. Also, we keep saying the word recount, and I'm just wondering if we're actually at the point where we need to call this a recount. Like, can we not just say that we're continuing to count? Because that's what we're doing. Like, we're not going back and counting again. We're continuing to be a thorough process of counting. We still haven't done the provisionals, the UOCAVAs. We clearly haven't counted all the votes for the absentees because the machine wasn't picking up on all of them. So I'm wondering about, just instead of calling this a recount, just saying that we're continuing to do what we're doing, which is counting the votes and having and pulling our vote review panel back in and having them continuing the process because we've identified that the machine and the software wasn't actually doing everything that it needed to do to accurately count the votes. Is that not, do we need to call this a recount? Can't we just say we're continuing? Because that's what we are. We're not done counting. And we definitely haven't counted all the votes, obviously, because the machine and software missed them. So why do we need to call this a recount? Why can't we just say we're continuing to count the votes?
Mr. Chairman, it would not be a continuation of the count because once it's identified, the votes that we've already labeled as unofficial will not change. In other words, let's say we count or recount 2,000 ballots. We're not going to add 2,000 more ballots to the count that we already have. What we're going to be adding to would be the UOCAVA and the provisional ballots because those ballots have not been tabulated. Now, when you start retabulating ballots, that's considered a recount. So it would have to be labeled as a recount. But I do have that number for the school district 2. It's 2,669 ballots.
Absentee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I think I hear you conceptualizing the count being over or recounting having to be done if it's a matter of you're at the ballot level, and I'm conceptualizing this at the vote level. So we're continuing to count votes. Maybe not reintroducing or introducing new ballots. We're definitely counting the votes on those ballots. Is my point. So are you saying that we can't just continue counting the votes on the ballots that we've already begun counting votes on?
No, you can't. You can't recount a ballot, like add to that ballot what was missed, so to speak. You can't add that back.
Unless you're on the vote review panel, because that's what they did.
But that was done during the adjudication process.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to say is we would just be expanding that process and continuing that process.
I have a question. I hate to interrupt, but I have a question.
Go for it, Ms. Fambro.
About the review panel, could someone please explain to me what is their function and when does their function end? Because most review panels, at the end of it, they tell you what's wrong, and normally you go back and try to correct it. But I'm not understanding what is their function here in Clarke County. I hadn't had that teaching yet. So can someone tell me what is their function from start to where we've end up now, where the voter review panel has told us, the Board of Elections, you all have a problem.
I'm going to say that's a question for Director Sosby and or legal.
Ooh.
So the vote review panel is called in to judge a ballot. So they make a decision as to what should or what, basically the intent of the voter. They make the decision on what the voter intended to vote for based on the marks that they made. But what I was saying is, if you process another ballot, continue to count a ballot, you can't tell the tabulator not to count what the ballot has already counted. There's no program set to say, well, I'm getting ready to process this ballot again, and we want you to, it looks like the president was counted. So don't count the president, but count this particular part of the ballot because it's got a check mark on it. There's no program that's set to count that ballot just because it looks like this particular office didn't get counted on the ballot. So I'm kind of confused at what is being said to continue to count the ballot. Every time you add a ballot to the manipulates the number of ballots that we're supposed to have. So if you have 14,000 names in the ENET system, then you're only supposed to have 14,000 ballots, not 14,000 plus the number that we're getting ready to add back because we get ready to tabulate again as continuing to count, as you're saying, Mr. Chairman. So I want that to kind of be understood that there's really no way of us continuing to count a ballot when we've already tabulated that ballot.
So I think I hear you saying, and just let me know if I'm off here. Are you saying that there's no way for us to go into the system and like fix, see that there was a mark on the ballot that the voter did that was not counted as the voter's vote? There's no way for us to change that, to insert that in as a vote into the system because we, the human being, noticed that the machine messed up there. Are you saying that there's no way to do that? Because that seems to be what the vote review panel did. And I'm confused about why we wouldn't be able to do that if that's exactly what the review panel did.
Because they did it that night. So if we pull that ballot and count it again, now I've got 14,001 ballots and only 14,000 names in the system.
Are you saying that it would add another ballot?
Yes.
So the way the system is designed, you're saying there's no way to look at a ballot that's already been cast and be like, oops, that's actually the system messed that up, and we need to make sure that we're serving the public, actually having the votes reflect what they voted. There's no way to do that?
It's done during the adjudication process, and that's it. There's no other process added behind that for that particular ballot.
But is it possible with the software is what I'm getting at? Just continue the adjudication process and do this for ballots that weren't flagged as needed for adjudication. But we as human beings want to continue adjudicating regardless of what the machine said.
So when okay, let me see if I can explain this a little better. So when the ballot is scanned, the scanner identifies that, hey, there's something on this ballot that needs to be reviewed. That's when the vote review panel looks at it and goes through the adjudication process to determine how the voter intended to mark the ballot. Now that they've made that decision, the ballot can now be scanned as a voted ballot. So that voted ballot is cast. It all goes to when a person comes in and votes, and it says, once you have put your ballot into the optical scanner, once you hit cast, the ballot is cast. So the vote review panel did what they were supposed to do according to what was kicked out. And they went through the adjudication process and marked the ballot according to what they decided as the voter's intent. But that ballot has been scanned. In other words, the election is sealed. That ballot is sealed. There's nothing we can do to change that ballot.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying that basically, if during adjudication for those 300 ballots, those ballots weren't considered complete, but the other ballots that have been scanned are being seen by the system as being already completed.
That's correct. And if you think
so you can't go back.
Right. And if you think about it, it's the same way as, and I'm going to use this as an example. It's the same way as a standardized test. And somebody, they go in, they mark their ballot, they mark their test, and then they come back 2 days later and say, oh, I forgot to answer number 50. You can't go back and change it once it's been picked up by the scanner, because the scanner already has how that ballot was read. So we can't go back and say, oh, well, let's look at this again, and we're going to mark this particular office because the scanner didn't pick up the check. We can't go in and rescan that ballot because it's going to throw off your recapping of it's going to be off.
Okay, Ms. Fambro,
Yes, Chairman Evans, what I really see now is that, and I understand what both you and Chairman,
Director.
Ms. Sosa, Director Sosby is saying, and you're saying you're on two different conversations, really. And both of you are correct. But what I see as the bigger problem is that the Dominion equipment is specifically not working like it should for the citizens of Athens-Clarke County. And this is what I feel like we should be addressing. And I understand what Director Sosby is saying, that this election is more or less sealed. But my thing is, do we really want to go into November with this problem that has been presented to us, more or less dumped in our laps? I don't think so. So
Right.
what can we do? What can we do? Because obviously the scanning process has a problem. So, and we can't fix it because we didn't do the machines. So somebody from Dominion needs to fix that.
I agree.
And as a board member, I can admit to the fact that I'm not going to put it on the citizens. I'm not going to say they messed up. Of course, I'm sure some did, and I'm sure a lot more did not. But we are going to have to work this thing out with Dominion. And I think that really, I don't know how you do this, but those ballots, once they're sent off, they got to go somewhere and figure this thing out. Because I don't want to look like this. I don't want to be like this. I don't want to look like this in November. And we don't have to. We do not have to.
Thank you, Ms. Fambro. I'm concerned now, as you say these things, Ms. Fambro, I'm concerned now a recount isn't like, what's that going to look like? Because if the machine missed it this first time around, and then we rely upon the machine to do it again, I'm not sure that that's a good way to go here, because the human mind and the human eye, that's what was catching what the machine messed up with. So if we do a recount, it seems like we'd be setting ourselves up again to have machine error, software error, the same sort of software error, and without actually adjusting, like using our faculties as human beings to actually look at the ballot and point out this is where the machine messed up, and that's where the machine messed up. Like, so I don't want to have a process where we're not actually looking at ballots with human beings looking at ballots. So I think that I'm confused about the idea that we can't. Review panel said we could, that they did, and like, Director Sosby, are you saying for with certainty that there is no way us to just look at the images of ballots that have scanned and compare them to what the software is telling us was the votes that were counted for that ballot, and whenever we find a discrepancy with a vote that should have been counted but wasn't, we can't fix that? Are you saying with absolute certainty that that's the case?
Yes, I'm saying that with certainty, so that those ballots have been validated and published. All we can do is review the ballot, look at how the scanner read it. If it was adjudicated, look at how it was read through the adjudication. And then I guess we would write a report and send it to Dominion. But that's really all we can do.
Okay,
in comparing.
If we're going to call it a recount, if that's all we can call it is a recount, we don't have to have the machine. We can do a manual recount, right? We don't have to have the machine do all the work. We can actually have human eyes on and compare those results to what was done by just the machine.
Okay, so let's think about this. So we have equipment that's been certified by the state. It has a program that says that if a ballot needs to be reviewed, it will go through an adjudication process with the vote review panel. So it kicks out every ballot that the system has identified to be reviewed. Okay, so we're saying that doesn't work. So now we're going to bring in humans who make human errors. We make them every day to do a recount of a total of ballots. How do we know for sure if the human error is not going to kick in? So you got human error, you got equipment error. Does that really answer the question that the ballots were counted accurately?
Only, if I may say something, only if you bring in human beings, there's another 1 or 2 human beings standing behind me to help me make a determination. I don't know how long that'll take, but I'd rather put up 2 to 3 human beings against electronic equipment any day. It's not like that. If I put my eye on that ballot and I said this was not counted, okay, so what do you think, Jesse? You know, is it marked or is it not marked? That's the beauty of having human eyes on it. And the ugliness of having a machine read it is that it is what it is. You get what you get. And that's for me, that's not acceptable. So if we got to count all 15,000, rounding it off here, I'm okay with that.
And actually, Ms. Fambro, you just described what the vote review panel does. They look at the ballot, and the majority vote like rules the adjudication for that. So yeah, and actually we can have multiple panels. You know, we can have two different groups looking at the same set of ballots, and if there's any conflict, we can have a third group that would be the deciding group that would break the tie there on these ballots. So there are ways to do this with that don't just rely upon whatever the machine gives us. I mean, that, like, again, we were entering this being told that, you know, that the vote review panel was just looking at the red blocks, the red boxes, the things that had been flagged for adjudication, but it was the human mind that actually identified what the machine didn't. So to just go back in and rely upon the machine again doesn't make any sense to me. Like, just the machine. That if there's a way to use the machine and the human mind, which is basically what I'm saying to do already, like, and not call it a recount, but maybe do a recount in which we're using the machine and human beings to check the machine, then that would be more suitable for determining where the machine was going wrong. We can't just leave it up to the machine, though. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would like Director Sosby to, so I'm hearing this discussion about using humans to count the votes, but, and I'll let Director Sosby correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand there has been a procedure mandated for this Board of Elections to follow, not only for this board, but all Board of Elections across the state, and that is to use the scan device to count the votes. And so all I would say is, if you ask Director Sosby, is she aware of a procedure allows you to do it individually under the state elections code? Because if not, I think you're going to be in violation of the state elections code and state rules and regulations. And I don't think this board has authority to do that. So the question to Director Sosby, are you aware of anything in the state rules and procedures or the code that says you can just start counting each one of them doing it with humans and not using the machine to assist and run it through?
While we're waiting on Sosby to respond, I can just tell you this. I sat in on training provided by the Secretary of State's office. I dialed in that was about counting absentee ballots, and they did say it could be done electronically or manually.
Manual still goes through the scanner.
Correct. What's the difference?
And then you manually adjudicate the ones that
Right.
skipped out. So there still be use of the scanner.
Right, and that's kind of what I've been saying along with going back in and doing with the ones that have already been scanned, but we're being told that we can't do that with the ones that have already been scanned in. We have to do it all over again, rescan and recount.
Well,
Right?
it's just I thought you're not being told you can't do it, Mr. Evans. We're just saying the procedure is a recount. That's what the director is telling you.
I understand.
And she's also saying what she just said was you cannot just discount with a scanner. You have to run it through the scanner, is what I hear the director saying.
Right, and I guess the point I was making is we're basically at this point talking about the process that I was just saying, how it with the one change being would be calling it a recount, and we would be literally rescanning in the ballots. But again, we don't need to restrict adjudication to what the machine tells us needs to be adjudicated, because clearly the machine can't tell us all the things that need to be adjudicated. And that's why we need to have eyes on these ballots when we do this recount, so that we can like actually confirm or disconfirm what the machine is telling us.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we have a request to do the Board of Education recount again, which would entail several precincts, which would give us an appropriate amount of votes that we can look at again. We can, as we go back through this, we can look at it in terms of the machine, and we can look at it in terms of what we did with the adjudication process, which I think should be enough to either tell us whether we are getting the correct amount, everything is correct, or we need to make some to go further and look at the go further and look at the entire election, the total number of votes cast. That would give us more than your 400 that you were talking about earlier, and would be, I think, appropriate, and it's something that we can stop arguing about here. We know that we have the right to do that. If we look at that that election, those voted election process for those precincts. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. And I understand what Director Silsby's be saying when it comes to using that precinct, two birds, one stone kind of thing. But the thing is, if we do that, then the sample is no longer random, and it's not a random sample any longer, and that would possibly interfere with our ability to extrapolate from that sample what the rest of the ballots might look like. And that's the real issue with just artificially choosing, like just these ones here for CCOE District 2, is that it wouldn't be as random as we would like it to be, so that it's reflective of the 15,000 or 14,971.
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
I would remind you that Ms. Hines indicated you cannot do a random sample.
Absolutely.
I understand
that.
that.
In violation of the law. Well, I'm going to just, the board can do what it chooses. I recommend the board follow Ms. Sosby's recommendation.
Mr. Drake, I don't know if you missed the part where Ms. Hines said that we can randomly select precincts. That would be within the law. And that's what
I thought you meant that we're on the same accord there. You can do that as part of, I'll let Ms. Hines, why don't you reiterate on that issue?
Sure. So just to make it really clear, what the law envisions is that if you have reason to believe that there's something wrong with a race or a precinct or multiple precincts, that you can do a recount there. So what I was saying is as long as you truly envision that there are problems in multiple precincts or multiple races, then you could do a random sampling within those. But it has to be the whole precinct, the whole race. It can't be a certain number from one particular race at one particular location.
Right. Thank you. So now I think that we're at the point where we're it seems like the question is, if we're going to do a sample, do we just restrict it to CCSD BOE2 precincts, or do we select from all the precincts across the community?
Mr. Chairman, let me reiterate though, my recommendation as legal counsel for the board is that you follow the recommendation of Director Sosby related to doing a recount of the Board of Election race that has been requested for a recount. That's my recommendation.
Director Sosby, can you clarify your recommendation? And does that recommendation conflict with what I just said about randomly selecting precincts throughout the community rather than restricting it to CCSD BOE District 2 precincts?
So you would randomly select precincts.
Correct.
So is there particular precincts that the board would like to consider versus the school district 2? I mean,
Just making it random, that's all.
Let me again clarify, Director Sosby, what you initially recommended was a recount of the Board of Education race that we would received a request on, even though it's outside the parameters of what we're required to do. We may do that as a means of verifying the board's concern. Wasn't that your initial recommendation?
That's correct.
And that is the recommendation that I recommend as legal counsel of the board we follow.
So just to be clear, Mr. Director and Director Sosby, we have 30 to 50 that were identified as having votes that were not recognized by this voting equipment, and they were not restricted to the race for district board of elections or board of education. But you're suggesting that in order to remedy that issue, we just recount one election, one race out of all the races we did for this entire county, and just restrict our recount to just one race?
No, as I stated previously, it would be the entire ballot, not just that particular race. So the entire ballot of those 5 precincts.
That's what I heard you say.
What are those 5 precincts and how are they selected?
Those were the precincts that have school district 2. That's precinct 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and 4A.
That have District 2?
Yes, Board of Education District 2.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Director Sosby. What happens if, when we do the recount for that district, for the precincts in district, the BOE District 2, what happens if we find discrepancy, if we find more votes? Are we going to continue going to the other precincts throughout the community? Or are we just going to leave them alone? Is that what I'm asking about your proposal?
It's whatever you decide as the board. I would not suggest that, but it'd be whatever the board decides.
And Director Sosby, does your proposal, your suggestion, include manual recount or the manual aspect of human beings looking at what the machine has told us, not just for what it flagged for adjudication, but for actually looking at the ballots that weren't flagged for adjudication because it needed to be marked for adjudication that weren't marked for adjudication. So does that process you're recommending provide for humans to actually look at what the machine has told us to confirm or disconfirm what it's telling us? Just the ones that are flagged for adjudication, but for all of them?
No, I would say to recount the ballots of that precinct and of those precincts and not do it manually, but have the adjudication done manually. Again, those images are going to show us what was actually counted on the ballot. I don't think there would be any.
That the software isn't picking up everything that needs to be adjudicated. That's the issue. So if we just restrict ourselves to manually looking at the things that the software for adjudication, then we're leaving all these other things out that could have things that went unrecognized by the software. So we wouldn't be solving the problem.
Hold on just a second, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm reminded of the conversation that we had with Dominion earlier today. So we could program the ICC, which is the scanner, to kick out every ballot that the scanner doesn't read. And then we would have to manually adjudicate those. So somebody would get out a pen and duplicate that ballot, like the process that I did all night of duplicating that ballot to a ballot that we would then scan. So somebody would sit there, color in the bubbles according to what the ballot A would compare to ballot B. The vote review panel would judge to make sure that the ballot was marked accordingly, and then we could run those ballots through. We could set it to do that and not do the adjudication process through the software.
Okay, so basically, if there's a race that if there's a ballot that has any race that a vote is not registered for, it would kick those back.
If there was some kind of intent of how the voter voted, yes, it would kick that ballot back. But if they left it blank, no, it will not kick that back. It would just be considered an undervote.
Right, and I guess that puts us back to the issue, which is that the software that's supposed to be identifying voter attempts to mark their votes isn't actually doing that for all the attempts that voters made to mark their votes. So if we rely upon that software to, quote, decide which ballots we look at, we're still not solving the problem that this software wasn't actually showing us like everything that we needed to see to begin with.
But we can program the software to kick out everything. In other words, if somebody put a dot, somebody put a check, and the check mark didn't take up 12%, we could program it to where it doesn't accept a ballot that looks like the voter might have marked.
What was it programmed this past time?
To only accept ballots that had the 12% marking or more. That's the whole purpose of this adjudication process.
Right. So again, it said that the 12% was the metric, the measuring stick, and if it's a 12% or above, they counted it as a vote, right? And they kicked everything else out, and they marked them for adjudication. But the problem is, they didn't actually mark every single voter attempt at a vote for adjudication, like the ones that actually needed to be looked at. Our vote review panel, when they were looking at the things that the system flagged, saw things that weren't flagged that should have been flagged, and the vote wasn't counted. And like, had they not seen that with their own human eyes, the vote would.
So on a ballot that was kicked out by the scanner, let's say president, there's a box around president because the president was marked with the check. What the staff did was went through the whole ballot that was kicked out and marked the bubbles according to where they had checks. They didn't just mark the ballot where there was a box shown at. So none of this. So basically, if somebody marked their whole ballot with checks and one particular office was highlighted, they went on and marked all the other offices that had check marks.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
What if the software put a box on put a single box on a ballot for adjudication, but it didn't. But there are still votes on that ballot that were not counted.
But that's what I just explained. That if there was one that was highlighted, they went on and proceeded with marking the rest of the ballot on the
I know.
same ballot.
What I'm saying is, what if there was none that was highlighted, and they still made it, and the flaw that was picked up by human eyes on the ones that were flagged? What if that same issue, that same sort of thing that went unnoticed on the ballot that was flagged, what if that's happening on ballots that haven't been flagged at all?
I would say that's highly improbable because you would have to make at least a dot in that circle for it to kick out. I can't imagine a whole ballot being that way.
I'm just trying to figure out, like, we're going to rely upon the machine to identify all the ballots that need adjudication whenever the machine, the software that we were relying upon didn't actually identify all the races on a ballot that needed adjudication.
Would you like to just come over and look at a batch to see what we're talking about?
No, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. Maybe I'm not being clear. Yes, there were like 300 ballots that were flagged for adjudication that our vote review panel looked at, and the things that they were flagged for had red boxes around them on that ballot. Our staff, the review panel, looked at the entire ballot, not just at the things that had red boxes around them. However, there were things that were found on that ballot that were not registered as a vote, did not get tabulated as a vote, no green check, no green highlight, whatever, and wasn't boxed in red as something needing adjudication, but still clearly an intended vote from a voter. That this is according to our vote review panel, and that happened 30 to 50 times out of 300. And the issue, so it doesn't make sense to me to rely upon that software that wasn't picking up on everything that needed to be adjudicated to tell us these are the ballots that need to be adjudicated, and only these ballots, because it was clearly missing things that the human eye can pick up. So the point I'm trying to make is, whatever we do, whatever process, whatever we want to call it, a recount, whatever, it needs to have human eye ballot to confirm or disconfirm what the machine did, and not just the ones that the machine flags, the software flags as needing adjudication, because clearly that software has failed during this election to mark everything that needs to be adjudicated.
Well, we'll do whatever the board decides.
Okay. So I need to hear from other board members about what they want to happen right now.
Hey, this is Rocky, Mr. Raffle. I'm in favor of human eyes reviewing the ballots. Trying to follow the conversation. It's a lot of back and forth here on how we're going to do it, but I do know that I do want to have human eyes reviewing some and or all of it.
Thank you, Mr. Raffle. Any other board members would like to weigh in?
I agree with Rocky. I want to see some human eyes on some of this stuff, the most of it. And how can we do that legally?
Yeah, and I would really like to follow the advice we're given, and not do a random sampling. Or I'm at a loss of how to do this fairly. I'm not quite sure I have the answer.
When you ask how to do it legally, I'm going to have to defer to the director and tell me. I just can't say off the top of my head. I would follow the process mandated by the Secretary of State's office. Is the process I would follow for a recount. And anytime you vary from that process, you as a board are subject to having a challenge filed against you by the state elections, by the Secretary of State's, the state elections board. So I would ask the director, what is the process for recount require, and what are you allowed to do based upon your conversation with Dominion? That's a question for Director Sosby. I mean, there has to be guidelines on how you do the recount, and that's what I would ask. That's what I think you have to follow. Because the reality is, for you as a board, you're not at liberty just to make up and do it how you want to do it. Well, I know, and I understand why you want to do that, but.
And Mr. Drake, I understand that, and perhaps Director Sosby might want to make a call early in the morning to Dominion once again after she's heard all of these conversations, because she was not, we've talked about some things here today that there's no way she could have brought up, with them this morning or whenever this afternoon, whenever she talked to them. And I would suggest that she call them as early as possible in the morning and ask them, what did you guys have in place? What did you all work out with the Secretary of State when you have a board? I mean, you have a review board that's calling actually calling the whole election into a question. That's where it stands for me.
So I think I've heard support for recount as long as human eyes are part of that process for most, if not all, of the ballots that are done in that recount. I think I heard Mr. Raffles say that he would be in support of doing it for all the precincts that are in Board of Elections, Board of Education District 2. And Ms. Fambro has previously said she's not in favor of that. She wants to move more random than that. We've had the attorneys say we can, as long as we are identifying the problem as being pervasive throughout our community, we can select particular precincts to do the recount for. Ms. Fambro, are you still of the position that you don't want to just restrict it to CCSD BOE District 2 precincts? If you're speaking, your mic's off.
Talking to?
Go ahead.
No. Well, my thing is, I serve at the pleasure of people. Even though I'm a permanent person, but I serve at the pleasure of the people. And in doing that, what is right for them? I know we have rules and regs to abide by, because I'm a staunch rule and reg person. But there has to be some way that we're going to be able to satisfy this community and not have them feel like something was stolen or taken from them. That's got to happen. I don't see myself serving on a board where people feel like that we didn't do all that we could do to assure that what they actually went to the polls for happened for them. So that's where I am.
And that would be.
I want to be legal, but I have a moral obligation. I have a moral obligation that I can't get around it.
Right. And we also all sworn oaths to do all that we can to ensure that we're reporting the results that are they're true and correct. That's
Cause Jesse, you
really
gotta
we,
sign that paper.
we all do. That way, I will make a true and perfect
Oh, all
return.
us got
Oh
to
yeah.
sign?
Oh yeah.
Sign too?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I will make a true and perfect return of such primaries and elections. Says it right there in black and white. True and perfect. Not
Okay.
okay, good, not, it's true and perfect return.
I mean, I can't compromise myself, whatever it takes for me not to compromise myself. I have to go with that. Whether you beat me, kill me, strangle me, do whatever you want to me, but I can't compromise who I am. I'm sorry.
Miss Till, I believe you were saying that we should do ballots. We should do a recount for all the ballots. Is that accurate?
I would like to know what the Secretary of State, the Georgia Code of Elections, what Director Soseby directs us that is legal and right in this circumstance, and that's what I would agree with.
All right. And Mr. Napper.
As I said before, I think we should look at Board of Education, all those ballots that were in Board of Education. We'd go back and recount all of those, and that would give us the sample that would be appropriate.
All right. So we need a motion from somebody. Go ahead and make a decision. So, Director Soseby, correct me if I'm off on this. Let me know if this is contrary to what you've said. So perhaps our motion could be that the Athens-Clarke County Board of Elections does a recount for all precincts within Clarke County School District Board of Education District 2. And as part of that recount, we would have a manual recount in combination with electronic recount. So human beings will be looking at what the machines tell us and confirming or disconfirming what they say. And if that recount yields significant discrepancies between what the first count was and the second count and the recount is, then we would continue doing the recount for all other polling locations throughout our community. Does that sound about right?
Yes, and I just forwarded you all the code sections and the SCB rule, and I think it's important that that's reviewed so that we all know what we're doing. For one, the only way that a manual recount can be done has to be a court order for that to be done. That's a manual hand count. So we have to use the scanners, number one, that's in the SCB rule.
Mm-hmm.
I just forwarded that to you. The link, I believe, is what I sent. It talks about also testing of the scanner prior to us doing the recount. So there has to be a test of that, like an LNA test, so to speak, of the scanner. And so it's not an easy, quick process, but we're going to follow the steps according to that rule. And but yes, it would be those precincts that I named.
I'm looking at the rule, and it says under A, it says recounts of primaries and elections conducted using an optical scanning voting system shall be in accordance with this rule. Then under B, it says The recount shall be conducted by tabulating all ballots utilizing ballot scanners. So is that saying that then we have to use the scanner for all ballots, or is that saying we have to do the recount for all ballots with the scanner that the scanner was used on?
That
Like
all ballots
under
that
this
were,
rule to select a certain precinct?
yeah, so all ballots that are selected to be scanned or tabulated through the recount would have to be done by the optical scanner or by the scanners.
And then we can have eyes on if we'd like to, because we'd still be satisfying that rule. Is that accurate?
I don't believe so. There's a portion says that, I want to think something about it's that the ballot scanner, yeah, so look at G, it says the ballot scanner shall be programmed to flag or reject ballots that contain an overvote for the contest to be recounted. So it goes on to talk about that, and I want to think there's a portion of it that says that nobody's really supposed to touch the ballots other than those designated to do the recount, but I'll have to look at that a little further. Should be open to public, but no person except one designated by the purpose by the superintendent.
We're talking about the physical handling of physical ballots.
Yes, so that's in D. It says who's authorized to actually touch the ballot or the ballot container.
Right, but that's not talking about the images that would be captured
By the scanner, right?
Yeah. So okay. So the motion that I just said includes that the scanners would be utilized for the ballots, but it also includes that we would have human eyes looking at the scanned images to confirm what the software did. Does that conflict with anything that to your knowledge?
What I think is important, what she's trying to tell you, Mr. Evans, is she has to follow that regulation. As it's written, you, the board, have to follow that regulation. And it's that simple.
I understand that.
And it actually talks about the review. If it gets kicked out, then it says in subsection G, the ballot scanner should be programmed to flag or reject ballots that contain an overvote for the contest to be recounted. One or more recount vote review panels shall be established consistent with OCJ section 21-2-483G to manually review the overvoted ballots. The recount vote review panel.
I can see it.
So no, but it's important for the rest of the board to hear this, sir. That the revote panel shall determine by majority vote the elector's intent as described in OCJ 21-2-438C. A duplicate ballot shall be created consistent with the elector's intent for the contest to be recounted, labeled recount, duplicate, and used in the recount. The original overvoted ballot shall be retained. I mean, the reality is, appropriate measure or motion by this board will be for that recount to be done in accordance with the rules and regulations of the state of Georgia. That's the appropriate thing to do because that's the only authority you have.
I understand that. What my question is would having human eyes on the scanned images be in compliance with the laws and the rules and regulations? That's what my question was.
Well, the human eyes element of it is when it's kicked out, the voter review panel reviews it.
Yeah, and they've said overvote. And Director Sosby, is that when that I'm guessing that's when knowledge refers to when there's more than one candidate has been selected?
Yes, overvote, undervote, any review of that recount would have to be done by the vote review panel, and that's is stated in H.
Yeah, but with D, it says the ballot scanner is going to be programmed to flag or reject ballots that contain an overvote for the contest to be recounted. So that's leaving out all the other markings that we talked about that weren't being picked up. and going back to 21 dash, let's see, 21-2-438, which, and Mr. Drake, correct me if I'm wrong, but rules and regulations produced by the Secretary of State's office aren't permitted to violate Georgia statute. Is that correct?
Well, you very much know, Mr. If you violate it, you'll be, action be brought against you by the State Board of Elections. So that, yes, exactly.
The SEB rules and regs cannot violate state laws, what I'm saying, is that right?
And they don't, sir. They make them consistent.
I'm just going back down to that section C of 21-438.
My recommendation to you as the attorney for this board is that you allow the recount to be done in accordance with Georgia law.
Okay.
That's the authority you have as the board. You don't have any more authority. You don't have any less authority.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and I'm not sure why this is being made an issue, framed as if I don't understand that, because I do.
Because I feel like you're asking the board, you're asking the director to do things that are in accordance with. She's going to follow the process that she's mandated to follow, and it's your mandate to follow.
Right.
Anything outside of that process, you're asking for trouble for you as a board, and that's all I can say.
Yeah, I'm not trying to go outside of any process that's legally mandated. I'm trying to understand what the process is.
Well, she just sent you the regulation for it.
And I'm also trying to make sure that we as a board live up to the oaths that we've sworn that we're going to return, that we'll make a true and perfect return of such primaries and elections, and will all times truly, impartially, and faithfully perform my duties in accordance with Georgia laws to the best of my judgment and ability. That's what I'm trying to do right now, is make sure that we're actually doing that, and that if a voter casts a vote in Clarke County, that vote gets counted.
Well, I can assure you, let me say this about votes being counted. If there was anybody who felt like that any election has been, the result of that election is in question because of the way these votes have been counted, they have the right to file an election challenge under Georgia law. That's the first thing you should know. So candidates have a remedy for what you're talking about. But I can tell you, if this board follows the state rules and regulations as been set by, adopted by the General Assembly, and the laws and the regulations enacted by the department, by the Secretary of State's as administrative regulations, you will have met your duty, sir. And if that weren't the case, then every board member across this state who signs off on these elections result will be in some kind of trouble, and that's just not the case. I understand your concern, but I recommend you do what Ms. Sosby recommended from the very beginning, and you allow her to do it in accordance with what the regulations provide. That's what I recommend.
Right, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I'm trying to get clarification on whether or not we're permitted as a board to have human eyes look at the images of the scanned ballots, look at the soft, like, and see that it has indeed done what it should have done, which was picked up all the votes that our voters cast. I'm not saying we shouldn't use the scanner. I'm not saying we shouldn't go by the process mandated by. I'm asking, does that process allow for us to have human eyes on the images of ballots that have been scanned for this recount? That's what I'm asking.
Well, let me say this, sir. I haven't read every word of what she said in this statute, but it appears to me in my first reading of it that it allows the voter review panel to look at certain ballots in certain instances, and that's what's allowed. So I don't, that's what I see. Now, Ms. Director Sosby might be calling it greater clarification of the Secretary of State. I could take more time to read the regs, but that's what it looks like to me at first glance. But you're asking us to give these answers that it requires research to. That's why I say you should just make the motion for her to follow what the law allows. And then you've met your requirement. But apparently, didn't she say you're not allowed to, nobody else can touch the ballots?
She said nobody could touch the physical ballot other than the one person designated by the board. She didn't say that you couldn't look at the image of the scanned ballots to ensure that people's votes aren't being discounted or like going uncounted.
Yeah,
Sure.
it does say that you can't. It says that only the review panel can review the ballot on the scanner.
Right. And I'm the board, the superintendent of the election, the Board of Elections is part of that review panel.
But you've designated somebody already for that review panel. I thought, isn't, I forgot the lady's name that was named,
We never took,
Carly Malloy. She was there on election night as a representative of the board.
who
She
made that decision?
She was appointed in 2017, I believe, and she's been serving on the vote review panel.
This board didn't actually appoint a person to represent the board. And it says, the statute says the superintendent or their designee. It doesn't say that the superintendent wouldn't be on the vote review panel. It doesn't make any sense that the members of the Board of Elections wouldn't be on the vote review panel.
Okay, well, I would like to suggest that every member of the board be present during this recount. Because it's come to a point now where our board needs to be able to account for what took place here. Because this has happened twice in my time being here in Athens-Clarke County, and no board member really has been present. Mr. Napper, I do recall, has been there several times and was there with us through the 36 hours. That I feel that you should be able to give an account of what took place so that there is some kind of word on what actually happened versus it being somebody who was appointed for an election. I would like to see a report from you rather than a report from a vote review panelist.
So I think what I heard you say is that all board members should be present as part of this vote review panel process.
Yeah, and I think it's only fair. I mean, you are the superintendent, and like I said, we have staff who we're drained. We're actually drained, and we have staff members who are taking time off. I demanded that everybody take some time off because this election was very stressful. And so there's some days off on our calendar right now that everybody's taking at least 3 days off. So yes, I do feel like the board needs to be present.
I fully intend to be present. I can't speak for the other members, but I can tell you that I'll be there.
Be there if it's before the 25th. And I'm sure it has to be because we got to get certified, right?
Yeah.
I will do my best to be present. I'd just like to add, going back while I have a moment to speak, that the oath does say in accordance with Georgia law. So as long as we're acting within what the law allows, then that's what we are sworn to do. The law doesn't give us space to do what we believe to be the right thing. Well, that's on the legislature, not the Board of Elections of Athens-Clarke County.
Thank you, Mr. Apple. Mr. Napper, Mr. Will you be in attendance for the vote review panel during the recount?
I don't believe the whole board was served as the vote review panel.
It just says, you said that
It's
you want.
5 members. It's 5 members on the vote review panel. 1 for each party, 2 appointed by the judge, and 1 the superintendent. So you would have to designate who from the board would be that designee.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that would require a vote or not, because if I recall that Carly Malloy, she was voted to be a vote review panelist, just like with how the judge makes their appointments as well as the Democratic Republican Party, they feel as a replacement. So I think it needs to be decided by the board who will serve as the designee for the superintendent.
Okay. And so I agree with Mr. Drake and with Director Sosby and with Mr. Raffle and with all the people that have been saying we should follow the law. We should, do what the law allows us to do. I am, the motion would be to continue counting or to do a recount of the votes in light of what our vote review panel found. And I guess it's going to be for, you're saying District 6, or sorry, CCSD Board of Education District 2 precincts, what is being recommended by our elections director and what our attorney is saying we should do, because our attorney is saying we should do what the elections director is suggesting we do. And I believe, Ms. I think you said you're okay with that. So the motion would be to do a recount for those ballots, the absentee ballots, in the precincts for CCSD Board of Education District 2. And we will do, as much as the law allows, we will have humans looking at what the machine tells us.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask, Director Sosby, I think she meant, were you just talking about a recount of the absentee or entire recount for that election? Could you clarify what you're wanting there?
Yes, it would be the absentee ballots for those, the 5 precincts, the absentee ballots.
Well, that wouldn't be meeting, wasn't the request for a full recount for that superintendent's race, that board of election race? So it's not going to be meeting that request, which we don't have to because we're not required by law because it's not within the margin of error. I just wanted to make sure when we talk about killing 2 birds with 1 stone, we really wouldn't be. And that's okay. I'm just making sure we understand that's not going to be happening.
That's correct, because it is not within that margin.
Okay. So again, the motion is to do a recount of absentee ballots for the precincts that are within Board of Education, CCSD Board of Education District 2. And again, we would have a vote review panel involved with that, and have that we would use the scanners as we're required by law, but we would also, to the extent permitted by law, have human eyes, humans looking at the images and that the scanner generates and comparing those with what the software says, the votes that were tabulated from those, and we would be doing that in search of any discrepancies, again, to the largest extent permitted by law. Is that a suitable motion, Director Sosby?
Well, I think that's not a good motion. I think the motion should be to do the recount do what she's requesting in accordance with the law. When you start talking about the extent permitted by law, I think you're putting in, making it gray, you're putting in, I don't think we follow the law. That's what we do. That's the recommendation I'd make for a motion.
Permitted by law, that would be somehow opening the door for a violation of law.
Yeah, I just think you should make it. I didn't hear what you said. You were quiet on my end for a little while. But my recommendation is the motion being to do a recount of those precincts of the absentee ballots, where the Board of Election race was District 2, and that you do it, and that it be done in accordance with Georgia law. That's it.
Okay. So I would like to, in order to, again, make sure that we are doing right by the voters of our county, I would like to, and get that multiple board members have said we need to have as much human judgment on these as possible. And, while also including, doing what we're supposed to do with the scanner and the software and everything like that, I think that it's important personally that we include what I just said, which was that to the maximum extent permitted by law, this recount process will include humans' eyes, and minds, basically checking to ensure that the software has accurately is accurately counting the votes with this recount. So I'm requesting that motion. And if that's not a suitable motion for members of the board, then I would ask for an alternative motion to be made that a board member would like to make. As a voting member of this body, I'm permitted to make a motion, but traditionally the chair is not the person that makes the motions. So I'm deferring to my colleagues on the board. And if you're trying to make a motion right now, your mic is muted and we can't hear you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we follow the law in terms of this. And I understand, and I agree with you. I think be more hands-on also, but that is not within the parameters of the law. Just to be follow the law and the recommendation of Mrs. Sosley and Member Drake.
So what we just need a motion to be made so we can make a decision on this. Let's just check in with board members to make sure we're all here. Mr. Raffle, are you present?
Yes.
Ms. Fambro, are you present?
I'm here.
All right, Mr. Napper's present. Ms. Till, are you present?
Yes, and I'll second Mr. Napper's motion.
Mr. Napper, would you clarify your motion, please?
Could
Yes.
everybody who
Ms.
mic
Fambro?
is on, could everybody whose mic is on, because I missed part of Mr. Napper's motion. Could every, except Mr. Napper? Because
Yeah.
this is very important. This is very, very important.
Let's mute our mics and maybe Lisa can do that while Mr. Napper makes his motion.
I'd like to make a motion to follow the recommendations that was submitted by Director Sosby and agreed with by our attorney, that we look at the BOE 2B, or is it 2B for that particular, and count all those votes. And
It's
that,
precincts within BOE District 2.
yes,
And doing a recount for those.
and do a recount for those.
And it was specific to absentee ballots. So let me see if I've got your motion down. I think, Mr. Napper, you're making a motion that the board follows the suggestion of Director Sosby and also the guidance of Mr. Drake, and that we you're making the motion that we would do a recount of the absentee ballots cast in precincts that are located within Clarke County School District Board of Education District 2, and that we would do these in compliance with all laws and rules and regulations. Is that what I hear you saying? Your mic is muted, sir.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Gotcha. And Ms. Till, I believe you seconded that. Is that what you did?
Yes, I second Mr. Napper's motion.
Okay, then I will go down the line for a roll call vote. Mr. Napper?
Aye.
Ms. Fambro?
I'm going to say aye.
Ms. Till?
Aye.
Mr. Raffle? And I'm voting aye as well. So the vote is unanimous. The motion is carried. Now we need to decide who will be representing the superintendent on the vote review panel during this recount. Do we have a motion? And I
I
would,
motion Mr. Napper.
I personally prefer that it be a member of the board. So we can have one of us in the room as a part of that adjudication process.
I make a motion that it be Mr. Napper.
Mr. Napper, is that suitable to you?
That's the wishes of the board.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so we have Mr. Rappel seconding the motion to have Mr. Napper serve as the superintendent's designee for the vote review panel during our recount of the polling locations within Clarke County School District Board of Education District 2. So I'll vote on the line. Mr. Napper, your vote?
Aye.
All right, Ms. Fambro?
No.
Ms. Till?
Aye.
Mr. Raffle?
Aye.
So we have 3 ayes and 1 no vote. And I will concur with the majority and vote aye as well. And so Mr. Knapp will be our designee. Is there anything else that needs to take place? Oh, Director Sosby, we need to know when this process will begin, and location and also the location, date, and time for when this recount will be taking place.
Okay, so I'm working on the notice now. How about at our facilities management building? We'll have to make sure that room is not, that it's vacant, that nobody has it reserved already. That's located at 2555 Lexington Road. And may I suggest on Wednesday, and we begin as early as 10 a.m. With hopes that we can finish
I
that.
think I heard you say Wednesday, 10 a.m. at the Lexington Road facility.
That's correct.
Okay. And this is open to the public.
Yes.
We requested that all board members be present for this process. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So board members, is that suitable? Like, is that the time and location?
I need to check with my wife and our child schedule.
Okay. Mr. Napper?
Yes, that is fine.
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I will be replacing Ms. Carlin Malone. Or is she going to be there?
You will be the board's designee, the superintendent's designee. So I'm not sure. I guess 2017 that decision was made, but this board didn't make that decision like with this group. So now we've selected you for this. Ms. Till, is that going to be suitable for you?
Yes, that's fine for me.
And Ms. Fambro?
I will not be able to stay the full time, but yes, I'll be there.
Okay, cool. And I'll be there too. All right. So the next, well, let me ask, is there anything else that needs to be said about this issue?
Not for me.
Announcements. We have a ballot reconciliation meeting June 16th at 1 p.m. at the Facilities Management Building at 2555 Lexington Road. We're going to be certifying the election, hopefully 3 p.m. on June 18th. If not, we'll have to reschedule that if the recount procedure takes longer than would allow us to do that at 3 p.m. But as of now, it's still scheduled tentatively for June 18th, 3 p.m. at the Lexington Road facility, again, 2555 Lexington Road. And then our next regular scheduled meeting is going to be July 7th, 2020, and we're at 3:30 p.m. Location to be determined. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
I second it.
So motion by Ms. Fambro, second by Mr. Raffle. Mr. Napper, your vote?
Aye.
Ms. Fambro?
Aye.
Ms. Till?
Aye.
And Mr. Raffle?
Aye.
And vote aye as well. It's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. I know it was a long process, but I really appreciate everything y'all done. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday, or tomorrow, actually.
Good evening.
Thank you all.